Welcome, welcome everyone.
Hello.
Welcome to the stream. How is everyone today?
We're looking at Twitter. I'm sorry. We're looking at Twitter and we're looking at YouTube chat.
That's the live chat.
We're everywhere.
Look, Turkmenistan. Welcome.
Yes.
Sri Lanka.
Sri Lanka.
Awesome. So we have a few special guests with us today, and we'll be going over that shortly. So we didn't have any content for you to learn from this week. What we wanted you to do is just review what we had previously. However, we are going to go through some initial code of conduct. Scott, take it away.
Code of conduct. Let's see here. Slides. We need slides.
Oh, shall we introduce ourselves? Oh, we should have got this down by now. Right. So my name's Simon Lightfoot. I'm a community leader, and I also am CTO at Deferred London, and you can get me here at Deferred London on Twitter. Scott?
I am Scott Stahl. I am also another community leader. Created Humpday Q&A. I am the leader of GDG Cleveland. And Majid is not here today. Unfortunately, there were technical difficulties. We miss you, but
come back soon.
We will be back.
I mean, I couldn't make it last week. I had a last minute dental appointment that, COVID times couldn't avoid that. Try and get in there when you can. So I'm back this week, and I still haven't had a chance to watch last week's stream, so I'm behind. So you have to tell me all about it later, Scott.
All right. Now we have another slide that we're supposed to get to.
The do's and don'ts.
Okay. What this comes down to, now they always tell presenters, don't read every word on the slide. Okay. The audience can read every word on the slide. But in short, be decent to each other. The bare minimum is the same courtesy that you would give to someone on the street whom you've never met. At best, treat them like your grandmother. So, but yes, be decent. Don't be an ass. And yes, you can be tossed, and you can not only be tossed from here, you can be tossed from the Flutter community Slack. It's our Slack. We can do that.
Right. So, So please be nice to each other, and let's crack on. So, Scott, what did people do last week?
Let's see here. What did people do last week? Well, Nikita, once again, she can't be here in person right now, but we've always got to have her as part of the stream. She's pointing out that you don't need to submit the app on the Play Store or the App Store in order to submit it for the 30 days of Flutter. You go to It's All Widgets, and that's where you do that for 30 days of Flutter. Now, also, let's see here. I have to say
that was lovely. It was Hillel who really put in some time and has given us a nice little submission form that you guys can if you've done any work over the 30 days of Flutter, feel free, submit it there, and we'll love to see what you've done.
So let's see here. Okay, if you follow @ sorry, a little hard to read here on my screen. I've got a lot of stuff. If you follow @, they are giving away 100 copies of the Flutter course by Angela Yu. So you can get that for free if you're starting out. It's a great way to get started in Flutter. You can do it right after this series. And drum roll, please. Next. Aha. Jazzy. Jazzy got done with Code Labs Part 1 and 2. She's having fun. She's about to do it again for iOS. Warning, Jazzy knows Kendo. Don't mess with Jazzy. Don't mess with Jazzy. So, also here, we have a to-do app, okay, from Kilo Loco. So the to-do app is using AWS Amplify, okay, instead of GCP. So a lot of people are using Flutter with AWS. It is possible. You can also use it with Azure from Microsoft. Flutter doesn't limit you. So let's see what's on the next slide. Alrighty. Day 16, they were covering grid view and grid tile. There's a video. So if you follow CodePer, CODEPUR, you can take that in, and it's a great video there. And also I am sorry, but I'm not even going to try your name. I don't want to butcher it. But an excellent point is being made here. Okay. If you have more than one future that you're depending on, let's say you need to reach out to 3 or 4 different APIs and get JSON from all of them before you can bring up your page. This is what future.wait is all about. Now, to give you an idea, I have been working at times with international companies, big companies, lots of, 1,000 developers. They don't even know this. Okay, future.wait. It's the kind of thing that when they ask you about it in a job interview, it can get you the job. So make sure you know it.
And I'd also like to point out that our very own Randall Swartz from the community did a really good YouTube video on some of the problem aspects of that first-time Flutter users have with Future Builder and Stream Builder, and you'll find that on his YouTube channel. And there's also a link from our channel on YouTube as well. So go check that out after our stream. So who do we have next?
Who we have next? Well, word is that there's somebody from the Flutter team. In fact, I think it's somebody who might actually know what's really going on over there. Was a product manager, I believe. His who could that be?
Chris? Do we have a Chris here?
I think we have a Chris somewhere.
Hi guys.
Hey, Chris. How's it going?
I'm good, and I just want to set expectations. I may or may not know what's going on over here, Scott. So sorry if I disappoint you.
Oh,
there's so much happening, and I can imagine everyone's running around like flies trying to arrange for next week.
We do have a lot of moving pieces to make sure we land a good release for the event. Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's been very much a big anticipation around what's actually going to happen, and lots of things flying around that I know that people are like trying to guess what's going to happen, and we're not going to ask you about that, but we're all excited for next week for certain. Talking about next week, we are definitely on the stream next week. We're going to be doing a review of what happens at Flutter Engage, but we'll be doing that on the Thursday, everyone. So stay tuned. We will send out a YouTube link to everyone, and everyone will be able to see that. So if you subscribe to Flutter Community on Twitter, or just stay subscribed to our YouTube channel, you'll get a notification about the next event, and we'll be sure to have everyone's questions answered. We'll try and get to everyone's questions either this week or next week.
Well, I mean, of course, I'd like to encourage people to actually tune in for the event itself.
Of course. Sorry. Yes.
Why would they do that?
Yes. Anyway, so Chris, I think we have some questions lined up for you. Actually, I'm in the habit of having these on my screen, but I've lost them.
Uh-oh.
Do we have any questions from the audience?
Why don't we start with what you do there?
Oh yes,
A lot of people have no idea who you are and what you do.
Hi, I'm Chris, and I love Flutter. In fact, I love Flutter so much I joined the team, and that's really the TLDR of the story. I am a product manager here at Google. I've been on the Flutter team for just over 2 years. Actually, my first official act as an employee on the Flutter team was attending Flutter Live in London in December of 2018, which is quite an event.
I was gonna say, I remember seeing you there. Yeah, that was the first time we met.
I got to meet Simon there and a ton of the community members. It was just a fantastic introduction. And so the kinds of things I work on Flutter, on the Flutter team, I am responsible for the end-to-end developer experience, making sure that developers have a great experience using Flutter. That means our tools and a lot of our framework pieces, making sure we have the right docs and sample, working with our docs folks and our DevRel folks, working with our engineers to implement the features with the highest impact and that can help developers the most. I also work on our desktop platforms, Windows, Mac OS, and Linux, making sure that those are great experiences for developers. I also manage a lot of our ecosystem work. Right now, we have over 15,000 Flutter compatible packages and plugins on PubDev, which is amazing to me. It was literally in the 1,500 range, 2 years ago when I joined the team. So watching all of that take shape and take off has been amazing. So those are a few of the things I do on the team.
Very cool. It's a really interesting question that I just saw. Let me find it here. Do we have any chance for internships or anything like that? That's a question that actually I've never seen.
Oh, absolutely. We have a large number of internships. In fact, we had kind of an explosion of interns on the Dart and Flutter teams last summer, because when then the coronavirus was just new and everyone was newly working from home, and for a long time Google had very strict rules about what source code you could access, and you had to be at your desk versus on a laptop from home. And so at the time, we the interns that had already been accepted to Google really needed to work on open source projects and not using our internal source code and internal set of tools. So we had about twice the number of interns and interns on Dart and Flutter that we normally have, which was amazing. We got all kinds of cool stuff built. Some of it we haven't released yet, so it's still kind of being polished and brought into our product. But some cool stuff. But the short answer is yes, we do have internships. If you are interested in an internship on the Flutter team, just use the standard Google internship application form, and you'll be allowed to, during that process, let folks know what your preference is. Essentially, interns are, once they kind of make it over the bar, what happens is they're kind of given a plethora of options that they can choose from where they want. So essentially, Googlers pitch project ideas for Flutter and Dart and across the organization, and then interns can go, what sounds fun? What sounds interesting? So it's a pretty cool program.
I saw cool. Eric Seidel did tweet this link, flutterdev.jobs, /jobs, but this is for people that work on the engine. There's a few job opportunities there. So for people that are watching that are not beginners, this might be a good place to start if you want to join Flutter.
Oh, absolutely. The Flutter team is hiring full-time software engineers as well. So above and beyond just
I've been watching the postings.
Yeah, totally.
So Chris, here's a question that we get a lot. Do you have, and of course, I know you have some contact with larger corporations that have questions about Flutter. And the question here from Robert Filipovich is, any guidance on how to convince a development team to move from native to Flutter?
So we have, I still recommend, there's a fantastic presentation that Martin gave at the 2019 Mobile World Congress, which is, we did a triplet of talks. We did Flutter for Business, which is all about the business upside to Flutter, which I recommend specifically for this case. Then there was Flutter for Developers, and then there was Flutter for Designers. And I gave the developers one, and Will gave the designers one. And it's all about kind of Flutter from those different perspectives, how to think about it. And I still recommend those videos.
I do remember that Swav, he's one of the GDEs, gave a good talk at Flutter Europe around this topic, I believe. So there might be, that's on YouTube, I believe. So that might be worth checking out as well.
But honestly, the thing that I recommend to people is just try it. Try it for a week. See what you think. I have yet to meet a developer of any kind who, once they try it and actually try to build something, that they don't love Flutter. So
I think I think one of the things I've always said to people was to take some, if you've got a current code base or a current application, take one section, one page, something from the application, recreate that in Flutter, and note down how long it took you, how easy it was, or what the problems were, and that kind of like will give you a perspective that you can then do a little either report on if that's more formal in your company, and give it to your CTO and say, look, I tried Flutter out, this is what I produced, and this is how long it took me to do this.
Right.
Start a conversation.
I talk to a lot of customers who are like, okay, we set aside, 3 months for a proof of concept to see what we thought about Flutter. And we ended up implementing the whole thing in 3 weeks, and we were just blown away, right? I mean, I hear that all the time. So, honestly, setting aside a little bit of time and trying Flutter, I think is the best way to convince any developer.
I did forget, we have a hashtag, Bink, 30 Days of Flutter. Make sure you use that on all your social media as well as here in the chat, and we'll try and get your questions answered.
Okay, we got another interesting one.
Go for it.
Chris, you've never heard this one before. State management recommendations from the Flutter team.
Yeah, state management is certainly an interesting topic. I will break my recommendations up into 2 parts. One, hey, if you're used to something, if you used Flux or MobX or hooks, there are Flutter implementations of all of those. So feel free to pick those up and run, and it'll be very familiar, and you won't miss a step. If you're new to this idea of state management, and really state management in Flutter boils down to, I've got some data that I would like to share between multiple widgets in my tree, and I don't want to manually just pass it down through all the argument lists, right? And that's really what state management boils down to. And when you run into that problem, and you will run into that problem, everyone does. If you don't already have experience with a state management solution from some other framework, then I and the Flutter team as a whole recommends Provider. And Provider is something we've worked with between the Flutter team and Remy. We had a set of use cases where we wanted to make sure it was easy to do X, Y, and Z. And Remy stepped up and absolutely made that happen in Flutter, and then has continued to push it forward for future versions. And the nice thing about Provider is it's very easy to pick up. It relies on some lower level pieces of the framework that were more difficult to use than they should have been, and Remy just made it much easier to use them. And it scales nicely. Lots of apps can start with Provider and end with Provider and just use Provider through the whole thing and be very happy. Now, there are solutions for larger teams, larger apps that you might want to look at beyond Provider. Certainly Block is the one that comes up for people, and they've got large teams and large apps, and they'd like kind of a more regimented way of doing things, which Block provides nicely for. So you might want to think about that. But Provider is where we absolutely recommend people start.
All righty. Next, does Flutter have the concept of architectures? And this is an interesting one that I get a lot of times. And they're talking about in general, like MVM, MVVM, MVP, etc.
So Flutter itself doesn't mandate that you use these kinds of architectures for, these are fundamentally about separation of concerns, right? I've got my model, which is my data somewhere else, which is completely ignorant of the view of that data, which is completely ignorant of, user does some interaction and then fires off some actions, which causes updates to the data, and the view is updated, and the whole circle goes round and round. Flutter itself doesn't mandate any of that, which is really nice because you can use those techniques and those architectures however you like. I'm a big MVVM fan myself, and I can absolutely use that with Flutter, model view controller, model view presenter. Any of those architectures you want to use, you can absolutely fit on Flutter, and it works just fine. And in fact, you can often find packages that help you with it as well. And there's lots of blog posts about how do you do MVP or MVC or MVVM with Flutter. that will show you how to do that. So none of it is mandated, which means that you have the choice to pick the one you like the best and use it.
I think I've got a question here, which is quite interesting. It could start a conversation. For a beginner who just started with XML, some tips to get started with Flutter. I mean, yeah, I mean, XML with layout, I guess, on Android, or just XML in general. I mean, that's a very early question, right? For a very beginner, that's what we're here for with the beginners right now.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. You don't see a lot of beginners starting with XML unless there's some legacy, either network format like SOAP, or there's some legacy file format or things like that. Most of the cool kids these days are doing JSON in some form or another. But that said, there is absolutely an XML parser for Flutter. You can find it on pub.dev. I absolutely recommend using that. I would not start using regular expressions over raw XML files. Please, please, please don't do that. Instead, pull up the XML parser, and I think you've got some options there, including one from the Dart team that's pretty easy to use. That's what I would recommend.
I can imagine them complaining how slow it is when they start using regex. Yeah, we won't go there. I wonder if it just means that he's a beginner and he's just started programming, and XML is the first thing he's tried. In which case,
and there's a lot of information about XML out there, and up until a few years ago, it was the way to transfer data.
I just mean that he might just be using that as his first starting with programming in general. And if that is the case, then perhaps he should check out the beginner material that's out there for beginners to start with, scrolling across the bottom of the screen.
And also one other thing, if they started with Android, that might be the first thing they notice is the XML for the UI. So, getting back to Flutter, because that's the context of the discussion. And I want to make sure that I ask things in context because, Chris, a lot of the questions that we're getting are about, you guessed it, context.
Okay.
And people are, I see this question. We have a list of questions from Twitter, folks. We have been paying attention. And a whole lot of them are about context. Can we explain context? Context is everywhere. What is it doing? Et cetera, et cetera. So, Chris, context.
Well, gosh, that could mean so many things to so many people. But the core thing that you'll find that I would classify as context in Flutter is, of course, every Flutter widget runs, inside of a Flutter widget tree, which provides some context. And as part of that tree, we provide a lot of default information that you can access and use to drive your implementation of the widget, or by default, the implementation of the widget if you do nothing. Certainly state, if you have custom state, that kind of lives in the tree as well, generally, and I would consider context. Other kinds of context include, accessibility, semantic information. But I think probably the biggest kind of context you'll run into that really affects your widgets that you don't stick there yourself is themes. Themes are all part of the widget tree as context. So when you draw a button, by default, it's going to look into the tree and find the default theme settings, and that will define, what's the color of the background color of the button, and the shape of the button, and the font, and the size of the font, and the color of the font, and all of the things that you want for a button, without having you to program that every time you say, I just want a button, just do the right thing. It will look into this theme to choose those properties. And that's interesting for two reasons. One is you can very easily, on a button-by-button basis, say, oh, I don't want that theme. Here's what I want my button to look like. But more commonly and more powerfully, it allows you to say, actually, I don't want any of the buttons in my app to look like that. I want them to all look like this instead. And what that allows you to do is you can say, oh, I'm going to create my own theme, and it's, here's all my properties for that theme for buttons or text or anything that can be themable, which is pretty much anything in Flutter. And I'm going to stick that into the context, into the widget tree, and override the default settings for a theme, so that when even our built-in widgets, who have know nothing about your application or your particular hopes and dreams, will draw the button, it will just walk the tree looking for the theme. If it doesn't find anything, it's going to get to the top of the tree and find the default theme. But if you've overridden it, it will look in that theme and say, oh, this is the colors, these are the blah, 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 the properties I should use for a button. So that's kind of the biggest context, I would say, that, is there and always being used, and you might not even know it's being used, but it's a very, very powerful feature that you can take full advantage of.
One thing you just brought up.
I was going to say, from a more of a beginner standpoint, because I'm seeing some other questions in YouTube. In short, context and state are the current situation in your app everywhere for any given frame. What is, if you have a car animation, what is the speed of the car animation for this frame? What is the color of the box this frame? What theme is chosen this frame? All these things together create the context. And state management, of course, is managing the changes.
Leading on from that, actually, the one thing that I've seen quite often recently is why are the margins? Why can't I change these margins or these paddings or these sizes of the material design widgets? And I just want to point out that there is a lot of it's customizable through the theme, but also the way that Flutter works is through composition of widgets. So there's no reason why you can't just create an inkwell, create your own colors, create your own containers with whatever design that you want for a button, or spacing for a button, or whatever it might be, and then use that widget throughout your application. So the key here is you don't have to use the material design widgets. You can compose widgets out of lots of different things, and that's kind of one of the powerful things about Flutter and its UI system, I think.
Well, it is interesting that you're totally right. The material design widgets is one of the two design languages we provide out of the box, the Cupertino one being the other. As you point out, you don't have to use either. You can fully create your own design language from scratch if you wanted to. We don't typically, that is kind of, the dial all the way to the 11, right? Building your own set of widgets. We don't typically see people doing that. We typically see people, because material is so configurable, what they do typically is build their own design language by theming material. And it may look exactly like how you want it to look without having to, kind of build your own design language up. But you're really right. If there are things in our current implementation that aren't themable in the way that you want, that's okay. All the source code is right there. You can either build your own widgets from scratch, or
in a PR.
And you can use editor inheritance and poke the little bits and pieces in that you want to change it, and off you go. Right? There's lots of numbers on that dial where you can have full control over every pixel on the screen.
I've also seen that Canonical have released I think it's called Yana, which is their Ubuntu style widgets as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think is it Fluent UI for the Microsoft one?
There have been some projects that have sprung up to build the kind of Windows set of widgets as well. Absolutely, there's people can do all kinds of things. Yeah, cool stuff.
I think I'm just gonna bring this up in conversation. Someone's asked this a few times, but it's a bit of a confusing question for me. But I do want to. I kind of feel that why sometimes Flutter app does not remain native in some cases, unlike React Native. I'm not sure I get the actual question here, but I do want to point out that the reason why that we don't use the native is that we have this kind of control of the UI. We have this control to change every pixel on the screen, and that remains consistent with all the different devices and things that you run your app on. So that's one of the very powerful parts of Flutter.
Yeah, so there is two uses of the word native that I've seen used. One use of the word native is, hey, when you compile, Flutter app, which is built in Dart, for release, and you send it out to Android or iOS or Windows or whatever, Is that interpreted code or is that native code? And the answer is, it is ahead of time compiled native code. Just as if you written Java or Objective-C or Swift or C or C++, and you get native ARM instructions for mobile, you get native x86 instructions on desktop, and you get native JavaScript for browser. So we compile to native code, and what that gives us is native speeds, right? I mean, frames per second at whatever the device goes at. If it goes at 60 or 90 or 120, that's what Flutter is running at. And smooth scrolling and jank-free animation and et cetera, tear-free videos, that it runs natively. It is native code that is being executed. Dart is not there except for as a runtime to support Flutter, but it's not interpreted code. So that, in that sense, Flutter and Dart are fully native. Now, the other part of the question is, of the definition of the word native, is often, hey, when I'm running my Flutter app, I'm not getting the native control sets for the underlying platform, right? I'm not getting the Android button. I'm not getting the iOS button. I'm not getting the Windows button. And that's absolutely true. You are not doing that. You are getting the set of widgets that we on the Flutter team have built. And the reason that we did that is for flexibility, ease of development, performance. For example, there's no JavaScript bridge. There's no bridge of any kind. There's no going back and forth between some interpreted and underlying operating system back and forth that would slow performance down. You also have full control via the theming system of how something looks and acts and behaves. Now, the downside there, the potential downside, is if we take our eye off the ball and the material team changes the way the material is supposed to look and feel, and we don't implement it to match the current spec, or Apple changes the gradients or something, and we don't update it. We work hard to make sure that these things are pixel perfect, so that you literally won't be able to tell, hey, this is a Flutter app, this is a a native Android app, this is a native iOS app. That you hold them up and you cannot tell from a user point of view that these are not native controls. And if we haven't done that, it is a bug that you should log so that we can fix it.
Actually, that does actually remind me that someone did actually. I know there was a scrolling speed issue at one point with the iOS implementation. Submitted the bug, they showed it side by side, showed the problem, and it got resolved. It got fixed. It was community contribution.
It's not just down to what does the button look like and act like, but it's down to things like scrolling mechanics, which are different on different platforms, and we have implemented them so that you get what it feels like native scrolling, even though it's our scrolling implementation and not the one provided by the platform.
On that subject, I keep hearing people are hoping for more things for iOS. And I know a lot of that is dependent on the community helping out as an open source project. How are things going there with iOS support? Do you feel you've got enough, at least on the team? What can help?
We have a very talented team that is responsible for both of our material design implementation and our Cupertino design language implementation. They're very talented and super productive. That said, there's a lot to do on both sides. And while we have covered a large percentage of it, we have not done everything. And our scrappy little team will probably never be able to do everything. And the good news is, because it is, and this was what you just mentioned, Scott, because it is an open source project, the Flutter team that happens to be employees at Google only do a percentage of what we do with Flutter anyway. There are literally thousands of contributors around the world that have helped us with Flutter. And we could not have the range of features and functionality that we've got in Flutter without those contributors. And if you want to, there's some widget that you have a burning desire to either contribute to Flutter directly you can certainly bundle that up into a pull request, and we'll take a look. And we get a lot of functionality there. In fact, we've gotten a lot of desktop functionality recently that way. There's some smoothing out of the display as we resize that we recently got from a community member. But I mean, and this happens all the time. That's just one example off the top of my head. You can certainly do that. Or if you just want to release that set of widgets on PubDev, you don't have to wait for us to look at your PR or approve your PR. You can just ship it, right? And the world can just use it. And we don't have to approve it. It can just be out there in the world. These are wonderful ways for you to contribute. If you think that we've dropped the ball, we've left out your favorite widget, don't let that stop you. Feel free to build it, contribute to the community, and that's how we get the community we have. That's how in the last 2 years we've gone from 1,500 to 15,000 compatible packages and plugins that work across the 6 operating systems we support at various levels.
I've actually got one interesting product question here. Is what Google products are built or will be built on Flutter? And without spoiling anything, I mean, we know there's some products in the past that have been built with.
Well, so we will be built is not a question I can.
I thought so.
I can answer for you today. However, I would recommend that you check out the event on March 3rd for all kinds of exciting product announcements. But backing up to your question, I mean, we have a lot of developers. I think, well, it's in the hundreds for sure of Flutter developers inside of Google building Flutter products of all kinds. One of the obvious ones is the Stadia companion app, both for Android and iOS, built with Flutter in about 9 months from scratch. The Stadia app loves Flutter and has been very successful with it. The GPay recently announced that they rewrote their Flutter app from scratch, their GPay app, which was native from scratch in Flutter, and we're able to have all kinds of amazing results, reduce the number of lines of code, be much more productive because they can have all of their team as opposed to splitting them between multiple platforms, reducing their bug list by some ridiculous amount. I mean, and we're talking about over 1 million lines of code that they wrote in Flutter. So that's a big giant app that we definitely depend on Flutter. And then the other one is the other big one is for those of you, I'm sure people have heard of the Google Assistant before, which is the premier interface to all of the cool ML goodness that comes out of Google in our search team. The kind of best way to access that, of course, is the line of Google smart devices, smart display devices specifically. And all of the apps, when they were shipped, this wasn't true, but now all of the apps have been rewritten in Flutter. So all of the apps on those devices are Flutter. So that's just a few off the top of my head of uses of Flutter inside of Google. But like I say, there's hundreds and hundreds of Google developers writing Flutter code.
So we are getting near to an end time for you. So we have a last few questions if anyone wants to get them in right now.
One other one here. Something that we hear a lot now, I believe I understand what this is. When will we get a Dart VM in the browser? Now, I know there's a couple of different ways to be doing this because there is one in the browser already, right? You can write a Flutter app in the browser. Or do they mean that you can render to the browser from your IDE if you're developing for web?
Yeah, the reason I'm laughing is because actually before Flutter was really on the scene, the Dart VM, the Dart team itself took the VM directly into Chrome so that you could write Dart code and execute it directly instead of JavaScript. And that was kind of an early foray into making Dart more widely available. And it turned out that that didn't get the uptake we had hoped for, or the Dart team had hoped for. So that was an experiment that we stopped. But as you say, of course, the way to run Dart code and Flutter code today is by targeting the web as a platform from your Flutter code. The interesting thing about that is, in this particular case, because we're generating JavaScript, we're actually targeting the browser's VM instead of the Dart VM, and that turns out to be good for users, because we're essentially reusing the VM that's already not only in the browser in Chrome, but in all the other browsers, and have been tuned, for a decade or more to be high performance, as well as the JavaScript itself that we're generating. We've had that around for about a decade as well, and it has been heavily optimized across browsers. So they're actually getting the benefit of very highly optimized VM today. Although, and if you want, I mean, obviously you can target, Flutter with or Dart in the browser with Flutter itself, right? So that is the way to write Dart code for the browser today.
I'm seeing quite a few questions here, and I don't think we're going to get to all of them right this second with you, Chris. But however, I do want to let everyone know that we are going to continue answering questions this stream after Jay's coding session. So please stick around, and please re-ask your questions later on, and we'll get to them on the stream.
Speaking of which, today is not the last day of this stream, by the way. We continue doing this after Engage. So
stick around. Chris, next week, where do people go to sign up for next week if they haven't already?
So, there is this little search engine you might have heard of called google.com that I recommend. And if you just type Flutter Engage into that search engine, the right thing will happen. But if you want to go directly, you can go to events.flutter.dev, and that allows you to sign up for Flutter Engage, which is happening on March 3rd. It starts at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time.
So a week from now.
That's right.
Minus 45 minutes.
And we've been preparing for this really since the beginning of the year. There's just so much goodness in that event. I very much do encourage people to check it out. We're very proud of how that event turned out. Of course, we've had to videotape it. So we've got it all ready to go, as well as, blog posts and, samples and announcements and all kinds of wonderful things. So we're super, super excited for you to see what's coming.
Brilliant. Well, Chris, I think that's it for today from you. But thank you for joining us to answer the questions from the audience.
Happy to.
I'm happy to have you back. I did want to add one last thing. We didn't speak about this, but you are the committee lead for the Flutter Ecosystem Committee. And there's a lot of work you do around that and the Flutter favorites. So I just want to call that out and say thank you.
Oh, well, and thank you, Simon, and all the Flutter Ecosystem Committee members. I don't know if folks are familiar with how this works, but there's 9 of us. Only 3 of us are Google employees. The rest are members of the Flutter community at large, like you, Simon. And it's collectively, it's our job to kind of work with package and plugin authors to kind of pick the best ones that we recommend to Flutter developers. The larger our ecosystem gets, the harder it becomes to really know which are the really great ones that you should be paying special attention to. So special thanks to the ecosystem committee there for helping. It turns out to be kind of a lot of work, as Simon will attest to. We have just under 40 of them now, and we work very hard to make sure we're only picking the very, very best. So thanks to the committee. Shout out to the Flutter favorite and the ecosystem committee.
Chris, thank you for having. Thank you Thanks for having you. Whatever. I don't know. Yeah, go for it.
Thanks for coming, Chris.
That's it. Yeah.
I think those were the words Simon's looking for. Thanks for coming.
Right. Great. See you guys.
See you again soon.
Bye.
Take care. We've got a couple little things real quick before Jay comes on. One of them, you can tell this man is an absolute professional, as in a professional speaker. He is a professional speaking in front of crowds. He is a professional speaking in front of the camera. And you know this because right this moment, he is desperately trying to finish his slides before he has to go on. Okay. And as we like to say, you're not a real speaker until you finish your slides in the Uber on the way to the event. Please welcome Kyle Paul from the GDG program.
Oh, there we go.
Hey, everyone. Yes.
Simon and I are both hitting the buttons.
Surprise. So I do actually have my, so I'm just trying to find a slide from a previous talk, is what I was trying to dig into. But actually, I can go, sans slides as well, because I just wanted something that would help kind of clarify a little bit more why I'm here and who I am, what I do. So thank you for having me on 30 Days of Flutter. It's an awesome show. So who I am Kyle Paul, as my little name here in the corner says. That's my Twitter handle. But I am the North America regional lead for some of our community programs that we have. So you may have heard of like Google developer groups. You've heard of like Google developer experts, developer student clubs, women tech makers. So these are programs that my team looks after. The other members who look after GDG and WTM, so Kubra and Karina, they weren't able to make the time slot. So I hopped in to help talk about these two programs, as well as, so I look after the Google Developer Expert program and the Developer Student Club program, and a lot of the cloud efforts that we do in North America. So just a quick rundown with Google Developer Groups. These are groups out there in the community that are ran by folks like yourselves. I know Scott is a part of one. And so these are, as I mentioned, communities that are out there that talk about stuff like Flutter. They talk about cloud, how to build an Android app, how to, build something with Angular. So there's all kinds of fun stuff that you can learn by joining these groups. If there's not one in your city, you can, reach out to us and help you kick one off. Scott, looks like you had a question.
Yeah, I just really wanted to point something out real quick. I mean, we talk about Flutter and things like that, but we don't talk amongst ourselves. We drag people in like Simon, like Kyle, to actually give us a presentation and guide us through things. We do workshops, and then we head out for parties afterwards. Kyle and I have been known to run into each other at parties.
Not all the time. Don't give away the secrets.
Yes, not all the time. There are on special occasions.
Yeah, on special occasions in the U.S., Canada, East Coast, West Coast, Southern Coast. Yes. We run into each other too much.
Right now, there's been a time slot conflict with our live stream in GDG London. They're doing a Flutter and Firebase session right now. Ooh. So don't skip it. You can come back and watch it, but stick around. And
speaking of live stream events, Kyle, overall, GDG is doing something, I believe, for extendeds with Flutter Engage.
Yes, with so Flutter. So GDGs will be hosting a Flutter Engage extended event, which typically what GDGs do in this sense is sometimes it's live, so where you can have like a virtual watch party all together, watching the show, commenting amongst your community. Traditionally in person, how this works is somebody will throw the show up on the or the event up on a projector screen, and everybody gathers around, food, drinks, fun stuff like that. Yeah, it's a good time. Virtually, I know it's a little different this time, but
it's
you still get together.
Bring your own bottle.
Yeah, BYOB, bring your own bottle. And
I know a few of those.
Yes, and enjoying that you can talk amongst the community. There's going to be a lot of fun stuff that happens at Flutter Engage this year, so I'm excited for it. I'm looking forward to it. But join your local GDG. That way you can meet local developers and engage around engage around Flutter and all the exciting things that will be announced coming up here next week. And then
off the top of my head, I know that this month we've got I think London's doing one this month, GDG London. I mean, I know we got Netherlands did a really nice image as well with the windmill in that, so they're doing one as well. And I think there's a few others around Europe that are also doing events, so they are around. And definitely go find their meetup page, because a lot of GDs have a meetup page.
Yeah, and the other thing is too, they might not be live. They might not be live. They might actually happen a little later, so that way you are when you join them, they might be discussing things that are happened, and so that way you can like recap the event together and stuff like that. So if you can't join a live one, you can find one that's a post-event one. And go ahead, Scott.
Also, if you don't have one near you, the nice thing right now is with everyone being remote, you can go to anyone else's. Now, preferably it's one in your own time zone, but hey. And another thing, if you haven't been able to tell by now, okay, we have a lot of fun at these things. That's another reason I wanted to bring Kyle in. We learn a ton about all kinds of technologies because, again, we bring in speakers. Some of them are Googlers. Sometimes you get Flutter team members, Firebase team members coming out and teaching you things at these GDGs. Okay, it's not just a bunch of geeks sitting around in a circle, and we have a good time.
What do you mean we can't play D&D?
The closest one.
Like, what's wrong with this?
So hey, Noel put the link down there. Be sure to check it out. Kyle, thanks for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, and if you're interested in becoming a GDE, a Google Developer Expert in Flutter, I'm the guy you reach out to for that. If you want to learn more about the GDE program, happy to chat more about that as well. So, rock on.
Thanks for coming.
Sounds cool.
Cheers.
So what is next, Scott? There's so much going on.
I really don't know. I mean, it's kind of like I need some help figuring out what's next.
Perhaps we
could hire a detective.
Norbert.
Hello.
Norbert,
how's it going?
Do you know a detective, Norbert?
Yes, I've heard of a detective. But I'm not the detective. But I wrote a detective. A couple of words about me. If anyone has been following me in the past few years,
you've got to add your Twitter handle. No one knows where to follow you.
How do I? Oh, yeah, in the name. Well, you can find me under Norbert515, I suppose. Yeah. My name is Norbert. I've been developing Flutter for 3 years, and I've been always very passionate about making Flutter more productive, building dev tools and building like weird experiments. And yeah, I'm here today to talk about my latest weird experiment, so to say, which is not actually a weird experiment, but it is a detective. The issue was, well, developing is fun for the most part, but one thing I figured that isn't too much fun is debugging. Like when you're sitting there, you have an issue, it's not working, you're frustrated, your head is melting. And I kind of wanted to tackle this problem and see, is there something you could do to kind of enhance the way you debug? And one thing I came up with and thought about is a lot of mistakes and errors are not caught in time because of the lack of information. So you sit there, you kind of throw in print statements, you kind of go around and add some breakpoints, not really knowing what you are searching for. And that's how Detective was born. Initially, it was kind of using the Dart services package and seeing what I can do. And over time, it evolved to this thing which allows you to take a look at app state, to even change app state with the latest release, call functions, and all of that stuff. I could show a quick demo. Oh yeah, perfect, the website. The latest video I did. So what you can see is a couple of use cases that Detective can help you with. I think you have to refresh the site so the video restarts. Yes, so basically what you can see here is you have an application, you have state that is changing, you can just look at the state. In this example, what I wanted to showcase is you have some state, in this case you have an animation controller, and you can actually change the value inside the animation controller and kind of debug your animation. You can call functions, which is very useful, not only for debugging, but for example, when you are developing a login screen and you have some kind of nasty bug in your HTTP calls. So I did this a lot of times, is just to refill out the form hundreds of times because I thought, okay, this time the bug is found. But of course, it took another try. So with this, you can just call the function without having to fill out every single form field. You can call it directly.
And really, I know I turned this off. I swear I turned it off. I would throw it, but I'd get in trouble. Sorry about that.
So how easy is it to install? Because this looks pretty straightforward right here.
Yeah, so that's another cool thing is, so I tried to make it as independent from your code as possible. So I could have had some kind of SDK you can put inside your app, but I thought people don't really want to add more code and more dependencies. So pretty much all you have to do is download it using pub global, which has this neat way of downloading stuff and exposing it in your path if you have set it up. And then if you run your Flutter application, all you have to do is append this VM service out file, which basically writes to a given file the socket address of the internal VM service. And then all you have to do is just run detective. And in the free version, you can look at all the app state. You can look at blocks. You can look at stateful widgets and see what the current state is. And in the more advanced pro version, you can also change that state, call functions, and do some more advanced debugging. Yeah.
Wow, that is, I mean, honestly, like I've seen this in action. This is really cool. I'd recommend everyone to try out the community edition.
Thank you.
Definitely give that a go.
Yeah, and so
I'm kind of curious, how long have you been working on this?
So I think the first commit was at the start of December. That's when I started exploring and building and doing stuff. And in the meantime, like building something like this is very hard. I think I tweeted about it a couple of days ago, is you kind of start building and you add more feature and it gets more complicated and you don't see an end in sight. So it was really hard to kind of break it down to the very basics, what is important, and to build something solid from the ground up. I do intend to keep developing it and adding new stuff. And I'm kind of trying to figure out what does add the most value to people. So is it that you have no overview of your state? Is it that you want to change stuff? What is it that makes it hard to debug?
So would it be clear to say that you want people to give you some feedback and suggesting things?
Of course, always. I'm always trying to get some feedback. Yeah, reaching out through Twitter. If we're in the Slack, I think I'm in the Slack. You can just shoot me a message there. Yeah, email, like you can reach me through any means. In Detective itself, I have a feedback mechanism. I'm using Wiredash, which is very neat. So you can add feedback directly in the app and it's going to pop up in one of my consoles. That's like, if there is something that I could enhance so you can debug better, I figured everybody else could potential benefit from that too. Also,
I'm kind of curious. So Wiredash works on desktop. Is that what we're also hearing here?
Sorry, say again.
Wiredash works on desktop then?
Yes, of course. I mean, it's
to get screenshots and everything, like the screenshot of the app. Oh, it's amazing.
It's a Flutter widget. I think it should also work on the web. I don't see a reason why not.
We're gonna have to get Frederick on here to talk about that.
Like Wiredash, great product, can recommend. Yeah, got some feedback through that too, so it's definitely working. Yeah. Brilliant. So yeah, if you have cases like things that you like sat down on a Sunday afternoon and were frustrated with and thought, okay, if I would have had this would have been faster, just let me know. I'm trying to figure out what works the best. I think I do already have very cool features. If there's something to enhance, to add, feel free to reach out.
All right. Sounds great. I appreciate you coming on, Norbert. I've been playing around with Detective a little bit this morning.
Oh, nice. So, how did you like it?
Yeah. Pretty good so far. I got a little bit confused though, because I didn't realize as you keep adding classes, it keeps the old ones up and just keeps adding more of them.
Yeah, yeah.
So I was like, wait, why are my classes going off the screen to the left?
Yeah, that's true.
Well, there you go. Some good feedback right there. All right. Thank you, Norbert, for joining us. And we'll see you soon.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So we down to the next segment, the next big segment.
Yep. Something people have been waiting for. What do we got here? We got Joe Cool, I think.
Hey, it's the J.
Even though Joe is not my name, I do like that connotation. So
there you go.
You
want to bring the mic a bit closer, Jay? I'm not sure what's up with it this time, but
for sure. If I can turn up the gain too. How is this?
He's got the menu controls. Perfect.
Cool. Great.
So Jay, I do want to apologize for not mentioning sooner. Jay is the wonderful person that actually made the starting music for the show. So thank you, Jay.
Yeah, you're very much welcome. Thank you for playing it.
It's been really good to have some sort of content and not just a static screen, right? So we've got something,
definitely
right?
Not the same song over and over again.
Seeing pictures of Hack 19.
Oh yeah, that was 19. Yeah. Oh well. Good time anyway.
Okay, so Jay, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much.
Take it away.
Will do.
Fun.
Will do.
Bye.
We'll be fine. Bye-bye. So, Rocket Guide. Let's continue our project. So today's going to be fun as well. Last where we left off was we added a bunch of rockets to our application and did some JSON serialization or deserialization rather, and we did some work with getting real data into our app, a little bit of animations, all good stuff. Now, last time we did a little bit of a teaser. Where we added a feature where we started rather a feature where you could add your most favorite rockets to this list of favorite rockets, that kind of thing. And so we left you with that to implement that on your own. And what you guys have been doing is wonderful. So thank you for participating in that. Now today I'm going to be building that feature as well, but I'm going to use Firebase, both authentication and Cloud Firestore to build that feature. So let's get right to it. Now, as you can see, the app is not open yet because we need to do a little bit of configuration first. So first off, let me show you what I've done in my pubspec.yaml file here. I added a couple of new features, or rather new dependencies. So we have Firebase Core, then we have Firebase Auth and Cloud Firestore. Now, Firebase Core is needed for all Firebase functionality, or at least for most or for what we want to do. Then we have Firebase Auth, which will obviously handle authentication, and we have Cloud Firestore. Now I'm going to add some carrots here to make sure that we're on the latest build version. Now I did add these using PubSpec Assist, and though packages are getting updated recently, so we might be incompatible. Let's see. I think we're good. Let me run Flutter pub get one more time just to be sure that we're on the right version, and we're good to go. Cool. So let's start off by making a new Firebase project. Now, obviously, just like last time, if you want to see the code that we're working on, you can go over to our GitHub, github.com/community/rocket_guide, and follow all the progress. Now, the progress for episode 3 is not out yet. We're going to build that together today, so that's going to be fun. Now, let's make a new project by going to console.firebase.google.com, and let's create our new project here. So I'm going to call it Rocket Guide. And let's continue. Now, in this case, I don't need analytics for my project, so I've disabled that for now. And yeah, let's continue by creating our project. Now, our project will contain everything that we need in order to get our authentication and Cloud Firestore and possibly some other functionality running. And we're going to be implementing it from zero. Let me make that a little bit bigger, so that you can see how you implement that. Now, considering our time, I'll have to see what parts of Firebase we're going to implement. We're probably going to do an iOS app since we are running on iOS here. We might be able to do an Android app later on, but let's focus on iOS for now. So that's perfect. So first off, let me expand this and let me go to authentication. Now, there are multiple ways of authenticating yourself with a Firebase project. What I'm going to use today is going to be anonymous authentication because it's quite easy to get started. So if you go over here, you can see all the providers that we have to sign people in, and all the way at the bottom here is anonymous. So I'm going to turn that on. So using anonymous login, we can actually log in a real user, but we don't require a username and password. So that's perfect. So now that we have that enabled, let's go over to Cloud Firestore and make sure that we enabled that. Now I am located in the Netherlands, so I'll probably use the test rules that we have right here and then select the Firestore location to be somewhere around Europe. That would work best for me. But obviously, if you make your own project, you can just use the location that's nearest to you. So let's enable Cloud Firestore. And once we've done that, we can add an app into our Firebase project and get started with implementing our database. It's going to provision and set up the GCP project. Is that? Yeah, Google Cloud Platform Project. There you go. So we got our security rules set up, which means that we can access all the data for now. And there we go. Perfect. So we have an empty collection. So let's think of what we want to save exactly. So let's say that we have a collection here, right? Because Firestore is laid out as a collection of documents. Each document can contain some fields and another collection. It's sort of like a JSON schema, but it's a little bit different. But it's quite easy to work with, and it allows for some nice features such as real-time data. So let's say that we have a collection called users here. And then we have some random ID over here. And what we can do here is say favorited rockets, something along those lines. And we can make that into an array of strings. And that's going to be rocket ID 1. This is just so we have a little bit of an idea of what we want to save into our database. Something along these lines might work fine. So this looks good. Let's save that so that we have an idea of what we want to do here. So now when we have a users collection with some random ID that represents a user, we can then have our favorite rockets saved here as an array with a bunch of strings in there. And then we can update this to include new rockets, etc. Okay, perfect. So, excuse me. So now that we have an idea of what we want to save here, let's add a new app to our project. So I'm going to go to the project overview, go to the top, and then select iOS. Now our iOS bundle ID here needs to be the bundle ID that we have in our app. Now you can always change that, but what I'm going to do is go over to let's see, that's going to be the runner info plist file. And over here we should, it's not over here. Let me then look for it because it's something along these lines. There we go. It's in our PBX project file, dev.fluttercommunity.rocketguide. Perfect. So let's copy that, go over here and add it. Now for the nickname, I'm going to call this iOS Flutter app, just so we know what we're dealing with. We're not going to put this on the App Store, so we don't need that ID. We register our app. And there we go. So now we get this Google Services info.plist file. We can copy that, or rather download it. Perfect. So now that's in there. Let me go over to our project. So I'm going to open the Xcode project for our, or rather the Xcode, the workspace file for our project. That would be, I actually have a little shortcut for that. What you can do on Mac for that, if you're on Android, the Android configuration might come later, but all the documentation for this configuration is also up in the that documentation is out there easily for you to find. For now, I'm going to focus on iOS for a little bit. So let me actually go into my terminal, and I'm going to open the iOS folders runner.xc workspace, and I'm going to use Xcode for that. So open iOS runner.xc workspace -a Xcode. And now Xcode will open. Let's wait for that to happen. Will always take a little while. Wait for it. Wait for it. There we go. I just had to click it. Oops. Okay, perfect. So now over here, we have our runner project. And what we want to do is drag the file that we just downloaded in our downloads here. We're going to want to drag that into our project. Now, it's a little small. I realized that. I probably should have disabled the scaling. But you have that file right here. And just as this part of the website is telling you, you can drag that into your application. Now, in our case, since we're using Flutter, the application is called Runner. So I'm going to drag it into Runner here. Now, let's copy the items as needed and then press Finish. And so now it's added to our project, and this contains everything that we need to get our project started. Perfect. So with that, let's go to the next. And now it says that we need to add the Firebase SDK, but since we're using Flutter, we don't actually need to go through these steps because everything is handled for us. Same goes for the integration. And then this is the last step. So yes, we have looked at the documentation, so I think we're good to go. Let's continue to the console, and now we can see we have one app added. Perfect. So now next, let me actually open the folders view, and now we can see that we've added that here, and also our runner Xcode project is aware of the changes that we have made. So that should be most of the iOS setup, actually, as far as I can recall. We're just gonna try it, go ahead with it, and see where we land. That sounds like a good idea. So let's go over to our main and start adding a little bit of Firebase functionality. So first off, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go here and say Firebase, I believe it's app, and then because we need to initialize it, is it Firebase? .initialize app. There we go. So this returns a future, and we need to initialize our Firebase app first before we can use most of its functionality. So what we can do then, since this is a future and we want to wait for that to finish first, is we can make this function async, which means that we want to make this into a future. So now our main program is going to be async, which is totally fine. And then we can await this and make sure that our app is initialized properly with Firebase. So that's good. So our backend, we're going to also edit a little bit, but I'm first just going to run this app to see if we can get started using it. For that, I'm going to go over here and just do a Flutter run. I have my console in the bottom right here. It's a tiny little window, but that'll do. It's not really important what that says right now. Let's select the right iPhone here, and it will run. Perfect. Now the Android configuration is very similar. You'll also get a file that you can drag into your project, and that will be everything that you need. Now we are getting some conflicts here. Let me open this up. It's not live debugging if it means that we need to do a little bit of error handling here. So fetching the results for pod file, the pod version, returning local. Interesting. Let me actually just try to do a pod install. And there we go. We couldn't find a compatible version for Cloud Firestore. That's okay. I've been having a little bit of trouble recently with a couple of my dependencies, but let's try to just remove these dependencies for now. Or rather not remove the dependency, but just the version, and let Firebase figure out what we can do here. Okay, so now we've redone our dependencies. Let's try a pod install again. Analyzing dependencies. Ooh, there are no compatible versions for the pod for Cloud Firestore. That is interesting. Okay, let's say that we push this aside for a little bit. Let's focus on the authentication, and we'll get to the other parts in a little bit. Let's try another pod install. Firebase auth as well. I see. Okay, so Android, or rather iOS, is not too happy with how we have set up our Firebase dependencies. Let's try to quickly. Oh, Siri is getting a little greedy. Let's try to deintegrate our pods. That might be a good idea. So let me put this up on the big screen so you can see what's happening. And then we can do a little bit of debugging. So our iOS dependencies are actually managed using pod, which is the part that of iOS apps that manages external dependencies. And so what we can do here, if I make this a little bit bigger, is we can go into our iOS project, and what we can try is a pod deintegrate. Now what this will do is pull the pods right out of our project. And that means that we currently don't have any pods in our project, and that can help with resolving problems like these. So then we can do a Flutter clean just to make sure that we have a clean workspace to deal with. Okay, that looks good. And now let me try to do a pod install again. So I'm going to go over here to iOS, and I'm going to run pod install. Now I added an A there. Ooh. We need to execute Flutter pubget. That will probably help. In some commands, I'm actually adding an A because that means that Okay, now that we have a dependency set up, we're all good. And then let's just try to Flutter run the project again and see what it does. Let me do a pod install first. Ooh, Firebase auth is still not too happy. Well, that's okay. Let's figure that out in a little bit. I'll get to integrating it first, and then we'll get to actually installing it and doing all that good stuff in a little bit. So let's go over to our project here, and let me minimize this, and we can start implementing this already. Maybe some fellow crewmates of the Flutter community can help me to resolve problems like these. So if we have our backend here, we somehow want to know two things. One is, are we authenticated? And the other thing is, do we have that list of favorite rockets? Well, that's fine. So we're going to use auth and Cloud Firestore for that. So that's perfect. Now in our backend, we already have a call to get all the rockets. So that's good. But we need to add a little bit more in order to get our Firestore and Firestore and Firebase auth running. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do a couple of things. So first of all, what Firebase auth will give us, if we go into Firebase auth, let's have a little look. So this is a whole bunch of stuff that is not too interesting to us, but one thing that might be interesting is the current user. So that current user will be null at the beginning, but it will return a user object. So that's perfect. So let's first make sure that we know what current user we're dealing with. And we can do that using a stream probably. So let's have a look here. So let's say we have a stream of user, and this is our user object from Firestore, or rather Firebase auth. So we do stream user get, and let's say that is our current user stream, something like that. And then let's check Firebase auth. Now we get an instance for that. Whoops. I think, do we initialize that? Yeah, there we go. User changes. That looks about right. Doesn't have a default constructor. That's right. But we do have an instance. There we go. So what this will do is this will now return a stream of user, which means that in our app we can know when the current user has changed, right? So at the beginning, that user might be null, but later on in our program, it might be an actual user once we've logged somebody in, right? And speaking about logging in, we can also get that lined up. So let's add a little thing here that says, like, for example, future void sign up, something like that. And what that will do is it will also use Firebase auth .instance and let's have a little look here. And now we can create a user with an email and password, but there should also be sign in anonymously. Let's have a little look at the documentation. Asynchronously creates and becomes an anonymous user. If there is already an anonymous user signed in, that user will be returned instead. You must enable anonymous accounts in the auth section of the Firebase console before being able to use them. Well, that's perfect. We've already done that at the start. So instead of returning the actual user, let's just do await here. And there we go. So now we have our sign up set up, and this is already a good chunk of what we need to set up for authentication. Now, as far as doing the database stuff, in a little bit, we're going to have a list of our favorite rockets, and that might change over time, right? So let's think of it like this. Our list of favorite rockets is just a list with all the IDs of the rockets that we have liked or favorited. Now, what that means is that we get a stream from Firebase that contains everything that we want, that contains all the information for the user that is currently signed in. So let me just start by typing right here, a stream of list of string, because that's what we're going to return. Now I'm going to make that a getter to make it a little bit more simple. And let's say favorite rockets. Now, what is this going to be? Well, if I remember correctly, we can go to Cloud Firestore, or is it just Firestore? Firebase Firestore. There we go. They changed some stuff up recently. And so what we can do now is, since everything is divided up into a a collection that contains documents. Those documents can in turn also contain collection. You can kind of do a thing where you can say, okay, I want to get a collection. That collection is going to be called the users, which we did at the beginning. Then I want a document, and now that document needs to be the current user's ID. And so that means that we cannot get this favorite rockets until we have an ID for the user. So let's get our user ID. I'm going to do that here. Our user's ID is Firebase auth dot instance dot current user dot UID. Now we only get that if the current user is not null, but in this case I'm going to assume that we already have a user as soon as we want this favorited rockets list. So now that we have our user ID, we can search for a collection. In that collection we want the document based on the user's ID, and that's actually already most of what we need. Now, another thing we need is to return this, and this is not yet the right data type, but we're going to change that. So in our Firestore, we have a collection of users, and of that, in that collection, we want the document that has our user ID in it, which is going to save everything about our user. And then once we get that data, we want that data as a snapshot. Now, snapshot means that we get an updated document every time that document changes. And that's great because this allows us to do live data refreshes. So let's have a look here. What does this return? This returns a stream of document snapshot. Well, streams are really convenient to work with if you use them properly. So let's say that we have this collection, or rather this updated document of our user. Let's go to our Rocket Guide Firebase console, and let's have a look at our data again. So we get this document, and every time it's updated, it's also updated in the stream. We don't necessarily want this favorited rockets part. We just want that list of our favorite rockets. So what we can do is we can map this stream. And that means that we change the document every time an update is pushed. So I'm going to go over here. I'm going to type map. And so this is going to be a document snapshot. And let's have a look at what that contains. So it is a document snapshot, so that's perfect. So document snapshot, what does that contain? It tells us if it exists or not. It tells us the ID and a whole bunch of other stuff. Well, at the moment, I only need the data from it. So let's first make sure that it exists, or rather if it doesn't exist. So if it does not exist, then we just for now return an empty list, which is fine for what I want. And then later we can maybe do something else and make sure that our database is all nice and clean as long as we don't have any snapshots. So say that the document does exist, that will probably mean that we have some favorited rockets here. So that means that we can do return document snapshot dot data. And now this is a map of string dynamic because that's always the format of a Firestore document, at least in Dart. So right here we get a map of string dynamic. Well, that's just sort of a JSON object, right? Just like over here. And what we need is the favorited rockets. So what I can do here is just say, I want the favorited rockets. So this should fit our use case perfectly. So in order to return a stream of the favorited rocket IDs, we first get the current user's ID. Now, obviously this will throw an exception. This will crash as soon as we try to get the ID of a user that has not been signed in yet. So we need to be careful there. But in this case, I want this to crash, or I want this to throw an exception to make sure that we have a proper app going on. Because if we try to get this list before we're logged in, we're doing something wrong. So I want it to tell me. Now, if we have that user ID, we then go into our Firestore, we look up the collection users and then the document by the user's ID, which I have sort of pre-made here. This is a little example. And then we get the snapshots. So we get updated documents through a stream. And every time our document is updated, we get a new document. And then we don't necessarily want all the data that's in there. We just want the favorited rockets. So then we can map that stream into a list of favorite rockets. If you want to be extra sure, you can do as list of string. And this way our map will know that we're converting to a proper list of string. But since this is a map of string dynamic, it can also assume that, hey, we're returning the right type. Now, there's obviously a lot that you can do here in order to improve this, but this will get you a head start. And this is what we'll be leaving you with for this little bit. Now, obviously, in a little bit, I'm going to continue this app and integrate it, run the app, and show you all the good stuff. And we should be able to get this running in relatively small amount of time. So it's going to be a lot of fun. So stay tuned. Try to get this working yourself. And yeah, I'd love to see you in the comments to see what you're building. And I hope to see you in just a little bit. Stay tuned. Oh, you are muted. Sentence of the year.
It wouldn't be a stream if you didn't have a typo and I didn't have a muted mic.
Well, there you go.
That's it.
There you go. It's live coding for a reason.
Yep, definitely. So, coming up next, we have three lovely ladies who are fantastic coders. And it's really interesting because they represent Flutter developers literally all over the world. Let's see, we have Daniela and Katarina and Pooja. So let's see. Daniela, I believe you are in South Florida. Yes?
That's absolutely correct, yes.
All righty.
One of the warm places in the country.
Ah, and the opposite of that, the opposite of the warm place would be Katarina. Switzerland, I believe.
Yeah, I'm in Switzerland, but because of change and global warming, now we have really nice weather. It feels like it's February, but it feels like March or April. It's really nice and sunny. So snow is melting in mountains.
Oh, man. You know, that has got to be the biggest dash I have ever seen. It looks like it's this big. Okay, there we go, Daniela. And Pooja.
Yes.
Pooja, let me see if I can mangle this horribly, but you are from Bengaluru, India?
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
That's right.
Oh, I actually got it?
Yeah.
Wow. You know, in Flutter, we really try to stress inclusiveness, of course. And from the very beginning, we tried to make sure that it was open, especially to women, because women had had such a hard time in other technologies. Now, all three of you have been around since pretty much the very beginning. And I'm wondering, did our efforts help? I mean, really, did it make much of a difference? Do you see a difference in the culture of Flutter versus other technologies you may have worked in?
Absolutely. I'll jump in on that. I've been coding for about 40 years now. And so part of that is I've seen a lot of differences. And one of the things that, and everybody's wearing their Flutter shirts. I wore my DevFest Florida shirt because that's actually where I was introduced to Florida. To Flutter, I mean, not to Florida, Flutter. And I had, you know, it was interesting. I liked it, you know, all that kind of stuff. But finding out about the Flutteristas and jumping on that, finding out about the rest of the community too, you know, people like yourself and Simon and whatnot, that all really made it help. And one thing I can say to a lot of our people out there, because most of the people watching are probably younger than I am, and most of you out there are probably men, but I can guarantee you there's a lot more women watching than there were, for example, as a percentage when I was in college. You know, I think I went to the University of Oklahoma, which is a pretty good sized school. And I think we had 4 or 5 women in my class in computer science. And this is back in the mid 80s. So stuff has gotten a lot better. And one of the things that Flutter has really done for me is actually kind of introduced me that there's a better way, that we can actually proactively be inclusive. I'd given a quick talk at Flutter Vikings about diversity, and I'd made the comment that all too often I'm the only woman that's in the room, and I just kind of accepted it that that's the way it was. That's how I grew up. That's what was going on. And one of the things that Flutter actually, from a social standpoint, has done for me is let me know that's not okay, and that we do need to go out there and we need to figure this out, and we need to work to actively try to make sure that we have diversity, and I think gender diversity is one of the easier ones to do. And that's why I'm one of the co-organizers of a group called the Flutteristas, and if anybody is interested in that, it's open to all female and non-binary people that are interested in Flutter. So you can always shoot me, my handle is on there. You can always shoot me a message, and I'm happy to make that happen if you'd like to join. Steph isn't here right now, but she's my other co-organizer, and so we would love to have any of you that want to, that are, like I said, female or non-binary. We're trying to make sure that keeps going. And I've talked enough.
You're muted, Scott.
Again.
There we go. Sorry, I have a neighbor's dog that's barking. So anyway, one of the things that I hear sometimes from guys is they think it's a matter of going out and finding underrepresented groups to come in just for the sake of having them. And it's not really what I've seen. From what I've seen, it's more like making sure the things that made people feel unwelcome are gotten rid of. And then those people from those underrepresented groups just come in naturally because now there's nothing to repel them, sort of. But Pooja, I see you nodding.
Yeah, so I think I have felt what Daniel has felt, being the only women in a group of men in a conference or an event or some place like that. Like, I used to love going to hackathons, but it feels like a boys' club, when it feels like, it's all the activities are also for the boys. And at that point of time, I kind of felt like, for me, technology was very important. Exploring was very important, but I wanted to understand why other women are not stepping up. Like, I have, just like Flutteristas, there are many communities that have, founded and worked with, where we are trying to understand, where we can empower people, just any people actually, understand the fear, why you're actually fearing to step up into this technological world that is so, scary for some people. So, what I understand is that, yeah, definitely in Flutter community, I have worked with Android community before and some web communities as well. I've worked for a longer time there, but I do feel much more welcome in the Flutter community. I have no idea why, in a way. Flutterista also came much later, actually, but I have been here for like around 2.5 or 3 years, I think now, right? And that time there was no Flutterista. But I think from the beginning, there was some kind of welcoming feeling, like, that the technology is for you, whatever gender you are. There were the founding people of the community were always welcome, just try out. They were pushing us to, have more content out and all that, work with projects, that it never felt like it was a gender game at all. Like, I never felt that I was a different gender in this group, different group of men. That is what makes you feel that, okay, that's something the different, because you should not think about your gender when you're working in technology. That's something that's so sad.
Yeah, it's very much so. That was part of the goal when we started. And speaking of started, Katarina, I think you've been in Flutter longer than I have. And you have been a GDE. I think you may have been a GDE in Google Developer Expert in Flutter longer than I have. When did you get started in Flutter, and what did you need to do to become a GDE? What's that been like?
So I've started, I think, since alpha or beta really early, and before I was Android developer, and I worked on my own project, and I got a customer, and I realized that I also need to have a code base for iOS to support iOS developers. And so I didn't want to learn a new language and a new framework. And so actually, I was at one of meetups that was organized by Women Tech Makers Switzerland and GDG Zurich. And I've heard discussion about Flutter, and I've decided to try because my project used Firebase. And Firebase was already very well supported by Flutter, even at early stage. And so it worked well for me. I've learned Flutter. In practice, writing a production application, and also I've published it. And as a part of Women Tech Makers Switzerland and GDG Zurich, I was giving talks. And when I traveled to my home country, I also used an opportunity to give a talk about Flutter. So originally, I am from Belarus, Minsk. So, and I've shared my knowledge that I've got doing my project, my application, and it's how I became a GD.
Nice. Nice. Now, speaking of sharing knowledge.
Scott, can I jump in on that last question real quick, though?
Oh, sure.
I want to make the point that I think that we've had stuff that's been so systemic that I think we do want to go out and try to make sure that we actively encourage people in underrepresented groups to come in. And I think that's the activity that will start making people come in more organically. But I definitely think that we have to be purposeful about it. And I think there's a lot of value in it.
So it's not, you don't think it's enough to eliminate the actual things that people run into after they're in the community, but need to get rid of a stigma that's out there so that they'll come in the first place?
So people even look to join to begin with. Okay. So yeah, it's not a super simple topic that we can handle in 15 minutes, but that's
but
I want to make the point. I do think we have to be purposeful.
And one other thing, we have about 5 minutes. Jay, that's your cue. But I did also want to point out, Kate, you were just saying about sharing knowledge, and there's an event coming up here shortly, I do believe. Let's see, Daniela, I think you're one of the people spearheading that.
Absolutely. Well, it's the Flutteristas in general. So yeah, absolutely, and we're all members of it. We have been working toward trying to create more confidence in our people and more abilities to do things and that kind of thing. So we're actually putting on our own conference. It's happening at the end of March. We've made announcements on it a little bit, but we'll have a full schedule coming up and stuff, and we'll make a big announcement, I think, at Flutter Engage. I know they're going to have a whole slide for us up on there for that, but it's coming up. I believe it's the 27th. It's a Saturday of March, and we're going to run it for one of the things we're wanting to do, since we're such a worldwide organization. And since Flutter itself is so worldwide, we're going to run it from we're going to run it for about 8 hours straight, so that we can hopefully have people that can join from any time zone and have a time where they can come in. And of course, it's online. Of course, we will have it to where people can come and watch everything. And it's being put on and presented by Flutteristas with some help from the community. People like Scott, I know, are going to help us out with things. And I think we're going to put on a great conference. The talks all look very interesting. They're across the board, and I think it'll be a lot of fun activities. And while it's being put on by Flutteristas, it's for everybody. So I hope that everybody out there will join. There'll be stuff for the beginners, like you people out there. It'll also be stuff for more advanced people, and it's kind of interspersed through, like I said, fun activities, quizzes, things like that.
Awesome. Now, I made kind of a mistake. I yelled and I made Jay come running back to his computer, and it's not his time yet. Oops. Sorry. False alarm, Jay. But we're going to be doing a Q&A. Ladies, please consider staying. Although, Pooja, I think it's the middle of the night for you right now.
It is. I mean,
Oh.
the midnight is starting, so yeah.
It's midnight?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, if you need to go, I understand you have a job. You know, you have a family, you have a pillow and a bed.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I have to get up in the morning as well.
Well, it's going to be morning in a few minutes, so you can just get up early. But hey, we are going to be doing a Q&A for everyone who wants to stay. Let me see here. Pooja, did you want to go, or would you like to stay a bit? Or
I would have to go, actually.
Kate? Okay. I'm sorry. Everyone say goodbye. Good night. Thank you. And Katerina, Daniela, it's up to you.
Whatever you want.
I'll stay.
I'm happy to stay.
Okay. And I guess, do we really have to bring Simon back?
Yes.
Muted. You were muted.
There we go. Hey, hello. Right.
Hello.
Who else have we got coming on with us?
Let me see here. I believe we may have Randall.
Yay! Back again.
And I do believe Ahmed. Yes.
Yes. Hello.
Excellent.
Everyone.
Excellent. So yes, Q&A.
Actually, you said it perfect, Ahmed.
Ahmed. I have been working on that. Nawal has been helping me.
Yes. Thank you.
Jay.
Hello, everyone. Yeah.
Oh, hey, you figured since I dragged you back early, you may as well join.
Might as well. Yep.
All righty. Well, hey, general Q&A. Let's see here. There is one in general that was pretty interesting, and it's one that we hear quite often. Mixins.
Oof.
And I believe it was the difference between mixins and inheritance. Does that sound right? I can't remember where the question was. It was way up there in the chat.
You have like a half hour?
Yeah, really.
There's a lot to talk about that subject.
Yes.
I mean, I'll take a stab at it. There's a problem around multiple inheritance, right? So inheritance is when you have one class and it inherits behavior from another class, right? So that's called inheritance. Now, if you want to inherit behavior from two other classes, well, that's a problem because now you're going to know which one takes priority over the other one. So there's a well-known problem called the diamond problem in computers in computer programming. You can go read up about this. But multiple inheritance is a very difficult problem to solve in programming languages, and one of the sort of ways that we've managed to solve that essentially with Dart is the with, and that is mixins. And this allows you to sort of bring multiple mixins, multiple inherited classes together and apply them to your existing class. There's obviously some current ones that give you behavior, but the general gist of it is they extend your class with very specific behavior, and then almost allowing you to componentize sort of your modularize your kind of widgets and your classes.
The easiest way I can explain it real quickly, if you don't want me to jump in here, the inheritance, like with extends in Dart, keeps this relationship at arm's length between the parent class and the child class. So you get to call things like super and stuff like that. Mixins is more literally what it says, mixing it in. It sort of applies a template on top of your class. So you don't really have a super class there. You're really just more methods and maybe some updated methods in your existing class. Is that fair?
Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Oh, I was really just going to kind of follow up on that and ask the question of then do we need to worry about conflicts between if you're including more than one mixin?
Yes.
So in short, yes, but also no. So it's a very subtle difference. Believe it or not, the order of your mixins in your class definition actually provide the order of the supercalls. So it's very subtle language thing. Anyway.
Yes.
Around this point, I do want to bring up this one. When will we get reflection of dynamic module loading or any information about it? Well, we have both of these. So originally, Dart came with a thing called Dart mirrors. Now that is very much a JavaScript kind of thing, and that's why it was. It's not provided. So Dart mirrors is not accessible through native code. However, there are several code generation options that exist around reflection, and you can do that with some code annotations. Google made a package, and I forget what it is. I will find it for you.
Reflectable.
Reflectable. That's the one. That's the one I was thinking of. There you go. Great. Thank you, Randall. and also dynamic module loading is actually what's called deferred imports. Deferred imports. They've existed in Dart from day one. You can go look them up, and they are really good for web because it means it breaks up your JavaScript into multiple JavaScript files, and then they can be loaded in independently, saving you bandwidth.
And both of these things, though, unfortunately, interfere with the tree shaking that has to happen for ahead of time compiling. In order to get a really fast binary program for all the platforms, you have to basically throw away whatever you're not using in the Dart and all the libraries you've invoked, and even your own code sometimes. I mean, if you write a subroutine you never call, why put that code in the release? And in fact, the Dart compiler takes that away. It's called tree shaking. It finds everything that actually will likely get called. And when you say anything might be called, then it can't get rid of any of it because it might need it.
Yep. One other interesting thing. Well, there it is.
Yeah.
So
Cascade.
Let's read the questions out just for those people that aren't watching the stream. What does it mean for a double dot operator like question mark dot, like dot dot repeat in animation control? So there's actually two different operators being spoken about.
Yes,
so the double dot is cascade. Does anyone want to take this one?
Yes, this one. So this one, it's for example, if we'd like to call a method, but this method might be null, and actually it's kind of a check that this method is not null, and if it's not null, we can call it. One of example, if we have, for example, button, we implement a custom one, and we decided to add callback on pressed or on tap, and accidentally we didn't assign any value to this callback. So therefore, we can call this callback question mark dot and call, and it won't be called. And also, so it can be used on method as check for null.
So
Okay,
that's
great.
the question mark dot.
Yeah.
That is. And just to give everyone the name for it, it's called Null Coalescence. Is the term given for that?
So in a sense, it double checks to see if something's null before it calls it, so that you won't end up with an NPE. In essence.
How about the double dot? Who wants to take it?
Because there's one thing with the double dot that I ran into that was a little bit of a hole I put my leg in, so to speak. The double dot is when you want to call more than one function, and you're not even really necessarily calling it on the same object. It's not like car dot dot start dot dot drive away. It's more like when you have something and then you act on it, you make a call, and then the next call isn't acting on the original object, it's acting on the return of the first call. So you have to return something before you can dot dot into the next call, because otherwise you haven't returned anything to act on. So what you can really do when you're reading this, it's kind of like a snake. You go along, this way. You do one call, and then with the return of that, you do the next call, and the return of that, you do dot dot. So what's happening with the animation controller is it's taking the return of one and then acting on it and then acting on it again. So, and it's basically just shorthand. It makes it easy to read. Yep. But I had made the mistake when I started of thinking that you were calling each one on the original object, and you're not. You're calling each one on the return of the one above it. You have to have a return.
The other way to think about it is when you do A dot B, the value of that expression is the output of B. When you call A dot B dot C, the input to C is the output of A and B, but then the overall value is the value of whatever C returns. Okay, we're making a chain, A dot B dot C.
And
if instead you say
ABCs.
yes, this is how you learn your ABCs in Dart. This is how I learned it in Smalltalk. That's why, because that's where this operator originally came from. A dot B.
Oh, I learned my ABCs.
A dot B dot C still calls C on the output of A and B. So it didn't change that function of it. But the value you get back from the whole expression is A dot B as modified by whatever C was. So it's a way of sort of breaking into the middle for the return value. That's all this matters for, is the return value. It has nothing to do with the actual operations that are going on.
Now that you're thoroughly confused.
Oh, I thought that made it simpler. Okay, well, whatever.
Let's line up the next
round with it. You'll see.
Yeah.
Okay, so someone can take this. Why isn't Android Studio autocomplete feature as using Flutter as good as it is with Android's SDK? I would actually say it's better, and the reason why it's better, it has AI behind it. But you know, start typing more, and it will learn more.
Well, and another thing, have you tried holding control in space? Because I believe that's also for VS Code and IntelliJ and Android Studio.
I know. If
you hit control space, yeah, it'll show you the possibilities for your autocomplete.
On VS Code, it depends on what your current bindings are, which are completely configurable. But yes.
Okay.
By default, it's control space, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
For me, it's command space. Okay.
Here's another one. Do you recommend using pointer and allocate in Flutter production? The only pointer class that I know of is the one from FFI. And allocate is used
that's getting low level.
I mean, you can. You just remember to free. It works.
I've never heard of a memory leak in a Flutter app.
It's possible if you don't dispose.
True. Though a lot of parts will tell you, tickers, for example, if they keep ticking, that'll tell you.
Actually, I faced this issue with WebRTC project, and I found it's a good point to mention that Riverpod saved our life and fixed this issue. We faced a lot of streams and memory leaks when we are using WebRTC. We are carrying audio and video through UDP, and we faced this issue. With Riverpod, it fixed this problem for us and fixes this issue for us.
Yay, auto dispose.
There you go.
Yeah, exactly.
Scott? Can I read this one?
Well, my camera's in the way. Give me a moment here. Now that I've moved the window. How do you get your motivation to continue to code and learn more, especially as a beginner? It's easy to give up when things do not work.
Jay?
Okay, well, I was going to say, first of all, don't try to take on things that are complex enough that they confuse you. Work with things that you understand, and what's going to happen is you'll begin to understand more and more, and you just keep adding things. Another way to really do that is watch 2 of the Widget of the Week videos every day. So, and when you get done going through all 80 of them or whatever it is they're up to now, just start over again from the beginning.
There is an interesting thing that people ask me, how do I remember everything? That I couldn't tell you how I remember it, but the point is it's somewhere in there. So the more you pick up, the more you learn. You kind of learn these bits of the jigsaw, right? And eventually the pieces start clicking together, and you build this bigger picture. But you have to persist, and that's the thing, right? Practice and persist, and just keep trying.
And again, if you watch 2 a day, then you'll only remember 3 of them from each week. But over time, it'll build. I'm sorry, Jay, go ahead.
No, that's totally fun. That is a good tip. This question spoke to me because for me, that personally, if I don't like something, I have so much trouble with getting to learn, picking up a new skill, or picking up anything really. So what helps for me is to keep it interesting, keep it fun. The only reason I am with Flutter where I am today is because I try to keep it fun, and try to do fun things. I could do I think I could do a lot more boring stuff, possibly with the higher pay. Who knows? But that's not interesting to me, right? Keeping it fun is the most important thing to me. So, and at the start of my Flutter career, or just my Flutter venture in general, that meant picking up fun projects. I started doing a startup with a couple of friends, and we wanted to build an app. And Flutter was the first readable bit of UI code, or proper readable bit of UI code that I found. And from that point on, it became fun. And so it was fun. So I did it a lot, and that's how I learned. And I kept doing other projects and kept doing more stuff that just seemed interesting to me. Some open source, some just for clients and that kind of thing. So even today, while doing work at Very Good Ventures, for example, I still try to find projects that interest me so that I'm motivated to keep working, and that's how you keep learning. That's one, and also surround yourself with other people who find it just as much as fun as you do, and who are knowledgeable about it. Learn from them, and try to stay positive.
Yeah, I have to say, there's nothing. I feel like there's a thing that programmers get, which is when you've finally solved the problem, it finally works, and you get that little high, and you're just like, yes, it works.
Yeah,
and that's also another thing that keeps it going.
Well, and another thing too is, I mean, Simon can tell you, I had to think about what I was doing for over 2 years before I finally just woke up one day, and instead of there's this thing and this thing and this thing and this thing and this thing, it all just kind of went. And now I don't have to think about it. I don't have to think about it anymore. It's just, okay, I'm going to build a page with columns, and I'm going to do this. I'm going to put a button there, and it's all easy. It's not I have to do a column. I have to make sure that I have expandeds. It takes a while, but it does reach a point where you stop thinking about it and just let it flow.
Hashtag 30 days of Flutter. I want to know if it gives me the same. I want to know if Flutter gives me the same power as Java and JavaScript. I love Flutter, but I want to know if Flutter gives me the same opportunity with Java and JavaScript programming.
Yes. Yes and more. Yes and more.
Yes.
Yes and more, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
And more. Yes.
If there's anything you can't do, in which I haven't run into anything yet. I've had to go and dig in a plugin or something like that can do it. But you've always got the ability to dig into the Java if you have to, but you don't have to.
It's worth mentioning though that because Flutter runs on top of the system that you're already working with, like Java or iOS or JavaScript, anything you can do in JavaScript, you can continue doing with Flutter. You just call out to that external library or the external function, and you can do that. So it doesn't stop you from doing that. In fact, it adds and enhances. So, yeah. But
like I said, from a practical side, when have you had to do that? Unless you're like the first person writing a plugin or something, there's stuff out there that does it for you.
I'm just saying. I'm gonna throw this one in there. So Jay, you're the expert in all things coding, right?
Ooh, what? Okay. How to init network API calls on a splash screen. I've integrated the launch screen from a native XML file. How can I make Flutter class a splash? I see. Okay.
Everything's a widget.
Well, yes. Oh, there you go. Next question, please. No. It sort of depends on how you've structured it, I think, if I interpret the question correctly. Basically, if you have your splash screen, there's two parts to this, because you can see your splash screen as a native screen that is that a user sees at the very first time that your app opens up, right? That part is still native, and then it goes into the Flutter counterpart of your app. And so at that point, in that native part, you can't do anything, so it's not really relevant. If by splash screen you mean the first screen that you render in your Flutter app, you can totally do network calls and all that kind of stuff. In fact, we're going to do a little bit of that in just a minute in the Rocket Guide stuff. But as long as you have kept your backend, if I understand your question correctly, if you've kept your backend and front end separated properly, you can do all the initialization stuff that you need to do for your app before your app even runs, or while you're displaying some sort of widget. And then once your app is done loading or something is booted up, then you can trigger a change, set state, or use a stream or whatever you want to do, use provider or block, and then show the actual content. So yeah.
I just thought, I suppose what I've done in the past is actually converted main to be an asynchronous function, and then you can wait for things before run app.
Yeah,
exactly.
Right. and that kind of runs it before your Flutter app runs. It's kind of somewhere in the middle. But if there's an error during that time, you can't display anything to the user because you're not running your Flutter UI yet. So just to be aware.
That's true. Yeah, everything you run before run app will happen in the splash screen of the native OS. So you can do all your initialization there and then switch to your main view if you want to.
Who wants to take this one? Why should someone prefer using Dart on backend to Golang, Node, or Python?
I have something to say here. I've recently started working with Firebase Cloud Functions interoperability between Dart and Node.js, and it's amazing because if you have it set up, so that's one thing. Share your models. Like if you're running the same code everywhere, first of all, that's less thinking, which is great because you got to save that for actual bugs and not mundane stuff. So if you're using the same models on both your front and back end, you only need to make one change and everything works. It's great. So you don't need to worry about, like, for example, casing between, you'll see this quite often, that an API uses snake casing somewhere else. So you need to convert it to camel case and back, that kind of stuff. So you don't need to worry about that. And if you update your models, since both packages are depending on the same models, they're automatically updated for you. So you deploy them both and they're always in sync. So that's a really nice thing to do with Dart. And obviously you get all the benefits that Dart has in the first place, right? Like native performance, it runs on a freaking toaster. So you can do basically anything with it, right? So those are reasons that I would consider using it. Now, obviously, you do have considerations, like if you're running Cloud Functions, you might still want to use TypeScript from some stuff. But if you can get the interop working, for example, for Cloud Functions, or perhaps even AWS Lambda, even though that interoperability is not out there yet, as far as I'm aware, then you can use that. But yeah, use whatever you feel like. But Dart is a good option.
Another thing to keep in mind is you can do all the validations you want on the front side. You know, like, is this the right length for an email address? Do these two values match what's in the database for me getting logged on? But remember that everything on the wire between your front end and the back end is jimmyable and observable. So you want the same validations to happen backside as you do front side. And if you don't have the ability to do that easily, you end up not doing it, and then we hear about you on the news next month. Yes, right. Security problems.
Yeah.
Okay. This question was actually asked earlier. Why does the new elevated button have a margin on mobile but not on web? This has actually come up a couple of times recently in some of the Slack groups, and that is visual density. It's a property of the theme, and you can override that and set it to compact, and you can have it the same. But to be fair, that's the idea. The idea is that on web you have more space, so you don't have to. You haven't got a touch interface, so the gaps don't have to be as large. So you don't touch multiple things by mistake. These are there on purpose. However, if you want them to be the same, you can force them to be the same using visual density.
And something that you said there that might have gone right by a beginner was you have the touchable surface. In essence, the human interface guidelines from Apple and the material design guidelines say how large the touch area has to be on a button, how all kinds of different things behave, what different colors you should use to make sure someone who is colorblind will be able to, so that they'll be able to see and read your app and see your pictures, etc. So the thing is that Simon's talking about, yes, you have a margin on mobile because they're trying to push some empty space on either side of that button so that if another button is next to it, you won't have an area where you might get your finger in between the two.
So people like us that be fat fingers, we don't press them at the same time.
Speak for yourself.
So I'm gonna bring this question into the chat, and this has been a controversial topic that I think we should discuss. So people's names that we mentioned on YouTube have produced videos around this topic. Now, originally, I just want to cover a bit of history here. So Flutter originally,
it is an intermediate topic. I mean, if he had been a tech lead or anything, anyway,
it's currently it's a topic that's in discussion. It's worth vocalizing here for sure. So a bit of history. is originally Flutter was running on OpenGL. That's the graphics system, and that's running under, you know, in the device itself, and it runs with that directly on Android and directly on iOS. iOS changed their entire backend system from OpenGL to Metal, which is their own implementation of a graphics system, and so Flutter now has to be work on top of Metal. Now Flutter uses a system called Skier, that's its rendering engine, and that does support Metal. Right, so it works. We can now use the apps. However, works perfectly, right? And that's kind of where this jank comes in. So the reason why it's janky is when it first starts up, it has to compile what's called shaders, and these are the things that draw the pixels on the screen, and it has to convert them from what's acceptable for the app to like the source code of the app kind of idea, to what the GPU on that specific phone and device can understand. And that's the compilation bit. And the problem here is it would happen on every time an animation is used. Once it's used once, it's cached. So next time you use that animation within your app session, it will reuse it, so it won't be janky, because it'll be nice and smooth because it doesn't have to compile. Now, there's some very, very smart people that have already addressed this topic in detail, and I will defer to the Flutter Dev Reddit channel, where Eric Seidel has posted a really nice long explanation of why this is occurring and what they're doing to solve it. And they're currently definitely resolving this right now. They are working very hard to resolve it. They've done a lot of prototyping and practicing with Metal to try and work out the best solution that is good for everyone. So you know, bear with us. That's going to get there. But in the meantime, it doesn't stop you out from being totally cross-platform, totally working. It's just a shame that initial run is janky. There is actually a page on the Flutter website that also talks about this and the points, and I'll link that below in just a minute.
Yeah, and I also just linked the Eric's thing from Reddit there into the chat. And if you don't know, Eric is the lead engineer on the Flutter team. He and Ian Hickson basically created Flutter.
Does anyone want to add anything? No, there's no.
Actually, I need to mention one important. When we are comparing Flutter to other frameworks, I need everyone to think about Flutter like a game engine, not like other tools are compiling to native and calling the native SDK. When you are thinking about Flutter, think about game engine with 2D support, not full 3D. So what game engine gives you? It gives you freedom, power, full control of the screen. And Flutter added more than that. It gives you material design and Cupertino style at the same time. So Flutter not compiling the code to the native SDK, Flutter compiling binary machine code directly to the ARM architecture and wrapping this machine or binary code through the specific platform. There is a driver for Android using the Android tools and the Xcode in iOS case and in desktop. So when you are comparing Flutter, you are comparing Apple and Orange at the same time, because Flutter working as a game engine from the beginning. And for that reason, when Flutter introduced what we mean about Flutter, it's UI toolkit. It's full UI toolkit, give you the power and freedom to do whatever you want. If you need to follow the native UI specification, Flutter gives you that with ready-made widgets, material design, and Cupertino style. If you want to create your own UI and do whatever you want with the screen, Flutter also gives you this power at the same time. And plus all of that, Flutter is an open source project. People are afraid if Google transfer to another project or what will happen with Kotlin and the new Kotlin features. Flutter is open source project. We are supporting Flutter since 3 or 4 years ago, and we will continue supporting Flutter. Even Google itself will not use it, but they are using it. They even now moved to other important application like GPay and other application to use Flutter also. I saw this question come many times in the chat today, so I want to answer it and thank you.
And I'd like to just double check one quick second. explaining very much the same thing that Ahmed just said, but a little bit differently. Being a game engine, think of Clash of Clans, Clash of Kings, Bubble Witch, Candy Crush. These things do not borrow the lists, the buttons, the images from the underlying operating system. They take a blank canvas and they paint all their own stuff, regardless of if you are on iOS or Android. This is what Flutter's actually doing. But when you see a button that looks just like a button on Android, when you see a scroll view that looks exactly like the same type of scroll view on iOS, when you see the sliders that look exactly like Cupertino sliders, they're actually Flutter drawing things on the screen just like a game engine, except they're designed pixel for pixel to make that drawing look like the native components. Unlike, see, React Native and a lot of the others are actually going to the operating system and saying, please put your actual native component on the screen for me. Whereas Flutter just tells the operating system, hold my beer and sit down, I'll call you if I need you. And then it draws its own fake widgets that look exactly like the original operating system's ones. But so when you're using the app, as Chris said earlier, okay, if the user can figure out that what they're touching is not actually the native components, if they can figure out it's a Flutter app, you didn't do your job right. So anyway, sorry.
I'm just imagining a little dash with like holding out a beer, like hold my beer.
That's it.
I'm going to make this work. Hold my beer.
Okay, how long before somebody makes that graphic and puts it on Twitter? And I do want to point out we're 15 minutes late to get Jay coding again.
Let's answer a few more questions here while we have them in the chat. So Jay, here's one for you.
Oh boy, what an honor.
Do you want me to do this? I'll do it. Create custom network packets like Scapy on Python, where you can customize almost every protocol packet in any layer of the TCP/IP stack.
And later on, he did modify that to be that he was actually asking about Dart, not so much Flutter.
Yes.
Probably.
Well,
no, I believe you get
socket,
full access.
Yeah,
you get full access to the network stack, right? I assume you could just write bytes to an IP.
Yeah, you can just create a socket class and write the socket .create. I think is just send some bytes, UDP, TCP, all of that.
Create your protocol, like
Be a maniac and create your own protocol.
There you go. It's a good learning experience, but you probably shouldn't send passwords over it. But you know,
there are a lot of good learning experiences that are not good.
It's a good learning experience unless you get paid for it, and which is it's a bad gig.
Jay,
what is the best automation trick you have to make your Flutter coding easy? Well, it's first of all, let me get to it first. To me, that is a two-parter. One is in my IDE. I have a bunch of extensions. I can show them in a little bit. Basically, that make my life easier. One of them is a PubSpec assist, which I wrote, full disclosure, where you can add dependencies easily to your PubSpec file for Flutter and Dart. Another thing is like the awesome Flutter snippets built by Nash of the Flutter community that I use all the time to add new classes and little things that I just don't want to think about or have to write all the time. That's a good one. Something else that's really useful is to go into your source code and just read the documentation right there. I also always keep a copy open of the command click or control click. I also always keep a copy open of the Flutter documentation on one side, just so I have a sort of, I guess, nicer sort of markdown view of whatever I'm looking at. And
that documentation, where can it be found?
Well, that is a great question. I think, and this is just from memory, but I think it's api.flutter.dev. There you go. So
nice memory.
Yeah, thanks, bro. So yeah, that's really useful too. But think of small stuff as well. Like I have a keyboard where I can map macros on this side because Mac has a bunch of F keys that it doesn't use for some reason. So you can do that as well. Another thing is to get a second monitor, which is sort of like I don't know. I think everybody could vouch for having a second monitor in general. Yeah. That's not just like makes your life easier, but having that convenience of not having to switch windows all the time is amazing, to be able to just see everything in sort of this overview kind of way. Yeah, other than that, know your keyboard, know your shortcuts, and know your widgets. At some point, you'll have written the same widget or the same sort of widget so many times that you know how to build something, and it's not even thinking work anymore. You just write it out. VS Code and IntelliJ alike have shortcuts as well for wrapping widgets and all this kind of stuff. So know your editor, know your keyboard, and know what you're working with. I think that's the best thing I can say.
I'd like to add also that I add a LinkedIn package to all my projects because I'd like to have some strict rules how I write my code. For example, using const with const constructors, and it helps to write good quality code from the beginning. One of the examples, it's a pedantic package, and it keeps the code very well structured and good quality from the beginning.
Definitely. I and we at VGV also use linters all the time, so much in fact that we have made our own package for that called Very Good Analysis. So if I mean, there you go. I mean, it's what I use, right?
Where's
so
the shades? You have to put the shades on for that.
Oh, dang it. There we go. So that's called Very Good Analysis, and it I think it combines pedantic and effective Dart, essentially. And adds and removes a couple of rules so that it works perfectly for us. And so I use that for everything, VGV or unrelated. So yeah, that works great. So do use linters. That's a great shout out there. Thanks.
So how were you able to toggle between dark and light mode without a trigger like switch or raise button?
Are you ready? Ta-da! So I'm using the simulator, and the iOS simulator has a shortcut which is Command-Shift-A, which toggles the system's dark mode on and off. And so there must be something similar for like for the Android emulator. I wouldn't know, but
yes, there is.
Well,
I don't know what the hotkey is, but there is.
Okay. Well, I do. So yeah, that's how I did that. But you can do that in software as well if you want to. But this is like in your app itself. This is just a little handy shortcut to do so in the iOS simulator. If you want.
It's also worth pointing out that you can actually fix the brightness of your which theme your app uses to bright or dark. And if you specify both, it will use the system's brightness level to choose the light theme when it's during the day and the dark theme during the night after sunset. So it'll do that for you. So it's quite handy.
Exactly. That's the part that changes the theme. It's as a result of changing the system's dark mode. Yeah.
Scott, do we have any other questions from your side? I'll bring out some more otherwise. There's a couple more. And then
well, yeah, because that's okay. We're about 20 minutes over for that. But actually, I've got one of my own, interestingly enough. And it does have to do with linter rules. Okay. Omitting types within a local scope. The linter is constantly nagging me about that. And I just go in and get rid of it out of my linter rules. Because, I mean, ever since I don't want to say got rid of Dart 1, but moved to Dart 2, everybody was going to strong typing. I mean, yes, we can type the letters VAR, but we try very hard not to. And now all of a sudden it's saying, yeah, the linter's trying to tell me to leave the types off. And I'm like, no.
I let the type inference. Right? Yeah, it's a preference thing. I let type inference do its work basically all the time. Mm-hmm. The only time that I actually write down the type is when I'm initializing a variable that can change over time, but has a null starting value. That's the only time when it's necessary. Other times I use const if I can, final 90% of the time. Mm-hmm. And if that doesn't work either, it's var. And only in use cases when I need to, I do the the other one.
There is something to mention here, just to be clear, that const means that during when your app is compiled, it will make that initialization of that variable and ship it with your app, which makes the running of your app, especially if you're like in a build method, for example, where it runs it multiple times, it uses the exact same instance, meaning that you don't you do less work during each frame. It'll increase your performance. Then there's also final, which means it'll be initialized once. Now, what's really nice about final, the compiler can do optimizations. Knowing it's assigned once, it can actually make an assumption that down a whole chain of things that is only ever going to be done once. So again, it will only initialize once, it will optimize out and do that during compilation as well. So you really get the benefit of const. If you can't make it const, make it final, as Jay was saying. If you can't make it final, use the var. And var is just declaring it. It's not the same as dynamic. It just means declare a variable and get the type from the right-hand side. So if you think about like left equals right on the line, that's normally an assignment. And the type of the left-hand side is always going to be equal to the right-hand side. That's called type inference. And yeah, anyway, sorry.
Yep. And just one thing, if you're not using type inference, you can still use const and final, although not var.
Well, var isn't necessary if you define the type explicitly.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yep. But good call out.
But that again, the point here is that var will infer its type from the right-hand side. So if you don't have to specify the name of the type, but it's not the same as dynamic, to be clear. Dynamic is, it doesn't have a type. It can be any type. So it's the same as
object.
Well, it's a bit more complicated than that. we'll go there for simplicity, but there's any, the keyword any that's used in a lot of language. I think Swift has any as well, which basically means the same as dynamic. It means it can be any object, plant it here. Now the problem here is the compiler can't make optimizations because it can never know what the type is.
Well, not just that, the human can make mistakes.
Yes. And this is what we saw with Dart 1. Let's be honest. Dart 1, as soon as it's one of those things I think all of us learn. We enabled the linter, right? We went to Dart 2, got strong typing, enabled the linter, went, oh my God, all these issues I had in my code, right? So we all experienced that day one when we were old. Now we had Dart 1. But you guys that are beginners, you're going to come in, you're going to add pedantic, as Katrina was saying, and it's going to just put you in the right direction straight away. So highly recommend it. Go for it. Yeah.
Also, do take the time to oh, did I interrupt somebody or no?
No.
Oh, okay. Also, do take the time if you add pedantic or very good analysis or effective Dart, any of those to your app. It'll probably come up with a whole bunch of stuff that you're doing wrong right from the start because you didn't begin your project with those linter rules. Take the time to go through all of them because they're there for a reason. And there are some that you might want to turn off because that's not the style of your project. But do go through each one of them and try to fix them up. There's also a tool called Dart Fix, which not many people know about. You can use Dart Fix to add a bunch of automation to your linter stuff for the first time around. So stuff like automatically changing a double quote mark to a single one. It can do that for you. That's something to look at.
Where were you this morning?
See, I
switched to pedantic. I switched to pedantic on this one project this morning, and I literally spent an hour and a half because 40 files had already been written.
Yep.
So then I had to dig through.
Yeah. Yep. Dart fix -- pedantic -w, and then it will bring all the fixes.
I'm sitting here wondering what Kate is thinking because she's like smiling, watching all of us just fumble around out here.
So I like pedantic actually, but in my own project I also use custom. So I use custom linting file. I have more strict rules. So I don't allow implicit dynamic, and because I don't want to catch null pointer exceptions, etc. So, and basically I also add this for my customers because sometimes they are beginners and they just start, and I don't want to somehow to move them away from Flutter. And when I add this pedantic and it's kind of 200 issues or even more, and if I add some strong type check, it's even more. So I usually do it incrementally.
You can disable implicit cast and implicit dynamic. You can disable them in the linter rule file, and then
yes, exactly. It's
you get these lovely errors come out like.
Yes. So, but actually, I hate dynamic because it can bring a lot of type casting issues and null pointer exceptions, and sometimes people call methods that are even not assumed to be for this type.
That's actually true. You won't get a compile time error if you have a dynamic and try and call any method on it. You can call it literally won't tell you that method doesn't exist because it's dynamic. It could at runtime have that method, and that's the problem we have with dynamic. You lose strong typing.
If you need to use dynamic, use object instead. Is my
really?
Yeah.
Because the only time I ever use it is JSON.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. JSON is the only time I ever use dynamic.
Yeah.
So at the moment we don't have union types. As soon as we have union types, we can make a JSON value type, which can only be a list, a map, an int, a double, and so on, and that will solve that problem. But right now, dynamic is the only way to go for JSON. But once you get that JSON stuff back and it's dynamic, convert it into your look at those map values, convert it into your structures, and that will make them strongly typed then after.
So is this the point where we talk about the packages that have unions, or should we just run away?
No. So one, I think we got one last question here. Hashtag 30 days of Flutter. Most of the widgets or images are slow, jank on first run. Every app open. Is it being worked on? It's a very important issue. Right, hold on.
We answered this.
We answered this. I even put
actually, or images is the key I want to say. A lot of people don't realize is there's one global function called pre-cache image. Pre-cache image lets you cache your images for the next screen before you get there, and that way they just appear immediately. They don't have to load, and I use it in all the apps. And so many people just don't use this, and this solves that problem a lot of the time for most people.
And if you're having the problem on your first page, do it with a loading screen.
Yep, you have full control over what happens to the image widget while it's loading afterwards, maybe an animation in between. You can do all that quite easily.
There's actually a few different packages out there that take it to the next level and do like animations and transitions between loading of images and stuff.
Usually don't even need to do that because you can use a callback function on the image widget and do it all yourself if you want to.
And apparently someone said, why don't you answer my question? Well, we didn't see your question, so that's why we didn't answer. However, keep your questions coming, because put them in the comments and we'll get to them next week's stream. That's for certain. So please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and enter your questions into the comments. And if you want to get your question answered before next week, go out to flutter.dev/community. We have Slacks, we have Discords, we have all these other ways of communicating. And Randall's always available to answer questions.
Yes. Randall's been going crazy on Slack.
Right.
And speaking of other questions, there are some people wondering why we haven't gotten to their question. Folks, you have to understand, we've been doing Q&A for half an hour longer than we were supposed to.
Yeah.
We've gotten everybody we can, and we still haven't gotten to them all.
We'll be back every week to answer your questions, though. And this is going to be Humpday Q&A. This is going to be a regular. And we'll have, I'm sure Randall will become a regular. And some of the other people that we've had on the stream over the past month will come back and be regulars on the show and help answer questions.
Every Wednesday, same time, except next week.
Yeah, not next week.
Next
the day
week,
after
next week.
The day after next week.
So next week it'll be Thursday because Wednesday is the Flutter Engage event.
3-3.
Yeah. We all want to know what's going to happen. So next Thursday we'll be back to address what, address what, comment on, and see what, and sort of remark on what happened during Flutter Engage. So yes. So thank you for having all the guests here. Jay, you're going to stick with us and finish off your live coding session. Is that right?
Yep. Stay tuned.
Thank you very much for sticking around, and thank you for everyone for joining us.
Oh,
thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Somebody just asked what's the future of Flutter, and I just want to say the future of Flutter. Well, wait,
infinity and beyond.
No. See, the future is so bright. You're going to have to borrow Jay's shades.
All right, yeah.
That's a good one.
Good call. Right? Say goodbye, everyone. We'll see you later.
Thanks. Okay, so let's finish this up. Let's have a look here. So where we last left off just now is that we added a little bit of code to our backend class in order to get started with our Firebase stuff. Now, if I can get the screen up, I have actually fixed the error that we had before with pods. In short, I needed to read the manual because iOS supports Firebase starting from version 10. And so now I'm running version 11 and we're all good. So it's that, and we need to ensure that our widgets binding was initialized, but you'll get that in the console as soon as you run the app. So we're all good there. So let's have a look here. So we have our backend class here, and that contains a current user stream that can tell us what our current user is. We also have a signup method and our list of our stream of list of favorite rockets that we can use. Other than that, I haven't done anything yet, so let's get to it, and we'll go through this quickly. Now, obviously, you can re-watch all of this later on, and this code will be up on GitHub on the link that you saw before on the screen. So don't worry about that. Let's get started. So what I might want to do first is I might want to say we have a couple of options here. Let's say that we are going to make a sign-in page for our user. So right here we have a provider.value for the backend of our and our home screen. So what I'm going to do first is move up this provider to the material app all the way to the top so that we can access it from anywhere. So let me remove this widget then. And let me add it here. And that's a provider.value with the backend. Now here, we're gonna have to make a choice. So let's say that we add a stream builder here. Now the stream builder allows us to listen to a stream. In this case, it's going to be a stream of user, which is going to come from Firebase auth right here. And depending on if we have a user or not, we're going to show the login screen, or we're going to show the the main screen, the home screen. So what stream does this stream builder need? Well, just like the future builder, we can give it something to listen to. So let's give it the current user stream, and that all checks out. That's perfect. Now, if our snapshot doesn't have data, in that case, in this case, it means that we don't have a user yet. So let's say that, for example, we show a login screen, for example. So like sign up screen, something along those lines. I'm not sure. There we go. Now, if we do have data, let's check out what that data is. Snapshot.data. And what do we have here? We have is anonymous, blah, blah, blah. We have all this user data. That's perfect. Okay, so let's make our sign up screen. I'm going to make a new folder here, new file and folder called sign up. And I'm going to make a sign up screen. There we go. Import material using a handy dandy awesome Flutter snippet. And I'm going to make a stateless class. And this is going to be sign up screen. Now over here, what I can do is I could make it a little fancy. So let's try that. I'm going to make this a stateful widget by changing it up like this. There we go. And now that it's a stateful widget, I can go over here and I can say var is loading is false. So we can have a nice little loading spinner. Now what we can do now is let's make a screen here. Let's say we make a scaffold and we don't give that an app bar. Let's just give it a body and let's make that a column. Now in that column, we put a couple of stuff. So first, let's make sure that everything that's within our column is centered by using the cross-axis alignment.center. This will center everything in the cross-axis, which in this case means to left and right because we're working with a column, which is vertical. Then let's also center everything on the main axis so that everything is centered. There we go. Now, what do I want to display here? Well, let's start with a nice little piece of text that says rocket guide or like welcome to. And then let's make a little variable for our text theme. So final text theme is the theme of the context.text theme. That way we can use the text theme that we have already made beforehand. And now we can go to our style and say, this is text theme.headline, I don't know, 5, for example. And then we make another piece of text and we're going to make that headline 4, for example. And then we say rocket guide. Perfect. Okay. So this will do for now. We don't actually have any interactivity yet, but I'm just going to make sure that we can display this data and let's see what happens. So let me hot reload. There we go. Okay, that's already starting to look nice. Now we have centered everything in the cross-axis and the main axis, but if we take a look at our layout using the P key, we don't actually take up all the space in the width here. Now, one easy fix for that, there are a bunch of ways that you can do that. One easy fix is to wrap this column with a sized box, and give it a width of double.infinity. What that means is that you tell whatever child it has to take up as much width as it can. It doesn't mean that it will overflow, but it means that it will be expanded in the width as large as it can be. Let's reload that, and there we go. Now our column takes up all the width and everything is nice and centered. So this already looks good. Welcome to Rocket Guide, and then let's add a little bit of padding. In this case, I'm going to do that with a sized box. Sized box and height. Let's make that 16, for example, like that. And then let's add a elevated button with an icon. Why not? And the label is going to be a piece of text that says sign up. And the icon is going to be, I don't know, const icon. What do we have? Oh, actually, we can just make this a text as well, right? Everything is a widget. So let me open up my emoji panel here. And let me put in, ooh, that's the wrong one. Let me put in a rocket. There we go. Now on pressed, let's leave that empty for now. We should just get a regular old button here. There we go. So that is something nice to get started with. And that will be our sign up button that we can use to sign up into our app. Okay, so now that we have that, let's make sure that we can sign up. And how do we do that? Well, we have provider, right? So let's import provider. There we go. And what we can do now is using a handy dandy little extension method. We can do a couple things here. So first off, let me make this nice, and let's make this a body function. There we go, just like we had already. Oops. And let's first get our backend instance. So our backend is going to be context.read. I'm going to retrieve a value using provider. It's going to be the backend. Now we need to import that class, so let's do that. Let's save this and run it and see if it works. Great, nothing's crashed. So we know that we can find an instance of our backend, which means that we can now just call backend.signup. That's perfect. So let's do that. And after that, I'm going to do a set state call and set is loading to true. Now, my idea here is to, as soon as we press the sign up button, to make this sign up button say loading instead. So let's do that. So if we are loading, then we add a different text, or let's add a spinner. That's actually nicer. So let's add a circular progress indicator that will show that we are loading because we are logging in. Now that icon can go away if we're not using it. So, or rather if we're loading. So are we loading? Yes, then we don't display any icon. Otherwise we show a piece of text with that rocket emoji. Perfect. Now our onPressed button, or rather our onPressed callback, I don't want that to be called if we are loading already. So let's say that, for example, if we are loading, then we don't have any callback, so we disable the button, and otherwise we try to log our user in. So reload and nothing's happened yet, which is perfect. So now when I press the button, this method will get called, which will log us into the app using an anonymous user, and then isLoading will be set to true through this set state call. And then the icon and label will be changed as well. So let's try that. Ooh, we had a little issue there. Now it's hard to see exactly what that was because we have successfully logged in. So we can't actually see what that error is anymore because now we're on the home screen. We're logged in. That's perfect. Let me actually take a look here and see where we have gone wrong. The icon is not null, is not true. I see. So that icon, since we're using an elevated icon, elevated button.icon, we need to make sure that the icon is not null. So that's okay. So we can keep that icon the same. And there, now it's fixed. So we always see that rocket icon. That's fine for me. So there we go. So now we are logged in, and that's perfect. We don't actually have a log out button yet, so let's add that. Let's add another thing here that will log us out. So let's say future void sign out. Let's keep it consistent. Async, and that's just await firebase auth .instance sign out. There we go. So now that we have that, we can add a little thing to our rocket guide here. And let's go to our, let's see, where do we have that? Home. And on the home screen, let's add a little thing to our app bar. for example, let's make it a leading widget. That sounds nice. Leading, if I can even spell correctly. There we go. And that's going to be an icon button. And for the onPressed, we're going to do the same thing that we did before. Context.read, get us the backend. And then sign out. And then for the icon, let's add a const icon, and that's going to be icons. I believe there's actually a logout. Yeah, perfect. That's what I want. So there we go. Let's try that. Refresh, log out. There we go. Log in, log out. Perfect. Okay, so every time we are signing up, we are actually making a new user, but that's okay. So let's have a look here. So now that we have our app and we are logged in, we can start trying to get our list of rockets. So that's perfect, or rather favorite rockets. So let's do that. So in here, we have our scaffold, and on our home screen, we have these rockets. Now, it would be nice to know if we have favorited our rocket here. So let's try that. So first off, let's make sure that we can favorite a rocket. So right here, we have our starship, and we should be able to just press a button here to add it to our favorites. And that's fine. So let's do that. So we have our rocket details page here. There we go. And over here in our app bar, we can add the trailing widget that will, or rather actions is what it's called. And in here, we can put an icon button that will show if we have favorited our rocket or not. So for the icon, currently, I'm just going to use a simple icons dot. Oh, actually, we can use the end icons here. And then heart. And let's make that an outline first. Now onPressed, let's make that null for now, or rather an empty function. That way I can just test if it looks okay. There we go. Perfect. Cool. So now that we have that button there, let's make sure that we can favorite this rocket as well. So how are we going to do that? Well, we can use a stream builder for that, just like we did before. Now, obviously, if you have a bigger app, you might not want to use a stream builder in every single little place all the time. You might have another state management approach that you can use, but for now, this will work fine. So our stream builder will actually get a list of strings, right, from our backend that will tell us what rockets are favorited and which aren't. So I currently don't have access to context.read because I need to import provider. So let me do that. There we go. Provider is imported. And now let's go over here. And now we have our list of favorited rockets. Perfect. So let's first check if we have data. So if snapshot.hasData is false, in that case, we don't have data yet. And you know what? Let's return, I don't know. We can return a loading spinner just to make sure that the user can see that we're checking if the rocket is favorited. Now, if that rocket is has loaded, if the data for that favorited rockets has loaded, then we can display it. So let's see, favorited rockets is the snapshot.data, right? This is a list of string, and is rocket favorited actually means if the favorited rockets contains the ID of the rocket that we've currently opened, right? So we have this rocket and that rocket has an ID. So does that rocket.id show up in this list? There we go. Now, depending on if that rocket is favorited or not, we can show the proper icon. So let's see, if the rocket is favorited, we might want to show something else. So if the rocket is favorited, let me do it like this. Let's keep it nice and simple. Then we show and icons dot heart, and we add a color. Let's make that colors dot red accent. That looks nice. So there we go. Let's try this. Ooh, and we do seem to be loading a long while. Let's see. Do we have any errors? No, we don't yet. Perhaps I've made a mistake somewhere here. Ooh, obviously, it can be the case that our document doesn't exist, and that's why we can't read from it yet. So that's okay. let's go into here and have a little look. So we can fetch our user ID, so that's perfect, but a document might not exist, so that's okay. So let's do a hot restart and see where we end up. It's always a process. Let's see, we do seem to be loading for a long time. Let's do a little bit of debugging here. So on our Rocket details screen, let me actually print the snapshot data. I do actually sort of know what that data is supposed to be, but we might have an error. So let's have a look. What could we do? Well, we can print the snapshot.error, and then we can see what we get. Hot reload, and there we go. The caller doesn't have permission to execute the specified operation. That is interesting. So our permissions are denied. Let's have a look at our Rocket Guide test project. So let's check our authentication, and we do actually have authenticated our user, so that's perfect. Now let me go over here into our security rules and make sure that we have our, there we go. So our security rules are not set up properly. That makes sense because these are quite secure rules. So let's have a look here. Allow read and write if false. So we never allow to read and write. Let me change that to true for now so that we can make sure that we can develop on our database, and then we could always add better security rules later if you want. Obviously, it's like small project, so we'll see where we end up. Let's do a hot restart to see if that changes. There we go. There, we fixed it. So now that we have access to our data, we can actually see if we favorited our rockets or not. So that's perfect. So in this case, we don't actually have a list yet of the rockets that we have favorited. It's empty, or it doesn't even exist in the first place. But that's fine, because that favorite rockets list is empty if we don't have any data, which means that it's not favorited, and so it's okay to show that it's not favorited yet. Now, one thing to point out, as Simon has said, is that I'm currently setting it like this, my security rules, so I allow to read and write any directory from any user. This is bad. It is good for it is good for working with test data on a database that is not public and a database that you own and that you're just doing tests with. Then it's fine. But anything else, you should have proper security rules, because anybody who can get your Firebase config, which is anybody, we do want to actually show we do actually want to have proper security rules so that people can't access data that they shouldn't have access to. Now let's add a little sensor widget to our progress indicator in order to stop it from being a little bit wonky. And I also see that I can make this const. So let's have a look at how that looks like. Let me do a hot restart. It's loading the data. And ooh, it might have actually loaded so fast that I can't see it anymore. Well, that's fine. Good to know that it loads properly. Okay, perfect. So now that we have our favorited rockets, the only thing really we need to do is favorite a rocket, turn it on or off. So let's see, once we press the button, what do we want to happen? Well, first let's get an instance of our backend. And I'm just going to do that in one line for now. So let's read our backend through using provider. And then let's say that we make a method that says, I don't know, set favorited rocket. And then let's give the ID of the rocket. Well, that's going to be the rocket's ID. And favorited is going to be, well, if the rocket is currently favorited, we want to turn it off. And if it isn't favorite, we want to turn it on. So is it favorited? Well, that depends on if it's favorited right now. So we can just do this, right? If it is favored, we should turn it off. If it isn't, then we turn it on. That's perfect. Okay, so now let's make that function. Let's go to our backend and let's make a new function here. Future void. Obviously, this is an async operation. This will take time to write to the database. So I'm going to make it a future because it's async. So set favorited rocket. Now this will contain two parts, two arguments. One is going to be, well, first off, I want to require everything just to make sure that I have provided everything that I need. So first let's require that's a string, I believe. Yep, the rocket ID, or rather just ID. and then favorited, which is also required and is a Boolean. There we go. So that's our function. Let's add a sync here. Let's make sure that our rocket detail screen is happy with that. Yep, no errors. Perfect. So let's go here and go over here and add our function. So what we can do in order to change our function is, or rather to change the rockets that we favorited, is let's first get the list of favorited rockets. Well, that's easy. We can do a couple of things here. So for example, we can say, we can get the document from the start, we can get a fresh copy of the document. But what we could also do is just use the stream that we use over here. So current favorited rockets could be the favorited rockets stream and then get the first one that we receive. And what this will return is a future of list of string. And the nice thing here is that I can just await this, and now it will get this stream, get the first value, and then immediately unsubscribe. And what that means is that we can really easily get a initial list of our favorite rockets. Perfect. So now, let's see. If we have favorited the rocket and the current favorited rockets does not contain that ID, which means that we still need to add it, we can add it to our current favorited rockets. And that's the ID that we add. Else, if we haven't favorited, or actually we need to do it like this. Else, if it isn't favorited, we could do an optional check here. For example, if the current favorited rockets does contain that ID, so we know that we need to remove it from our favorites because it's already in our favorited rockets, then we need to remove it. Current favorite rockets dot remove removes the first occurrence of this value. Perfect. ID. And so what we're left with now is the new list of our favorited rockets. Let's have a look at what that looks like before I do anything else. So let's say that we have a string here that says new favorited rockets, and we print that string, and let's add the old one as well. And then we can have a look at what this looks like. So reloaded. There we go. So it's tiny, but I'll copy this over so you can see what I'm dealing with. So this is what I get. The old favorite rockets is empty, and the new favorite rockets contains that ID. Perfect. Okay. And now all we need to do is upload this data to the database. So I'm going to use Firebase Firestore.instance, and then let's get that collection again. So the collection is going to be users. The document is going to be the current user's ID, which I can just copy from over here. Let's get that user ID. Perfect. And then the data we can do using set, for example. So that sets the data on the document, overriding any existing data. Well, that's fine for our purposes, so I don't really care that we overwrite anything. Now, what is this data going to be? Well, all the data for a Firestore document always needs to be a map of string dynamics, sort of like JSON format. So we can do that here. What does our document look like? Let's go over to our Cloud Firestore, check out our data, and let's see. This is our data. We have an object with one field called favorited rockets, and that contains a list of string. Well, that's perfect. So what do we set? We set a map with a single argument, favorited rockets. Let's make sure that I spelled that the same. Perfect. And now what do we add here? Well, our current favorited rockets list. There we go. Let's format that. Maybe we can get some nice formatting. Nope. Oops. Apologies. I scrolled too far there. There we go. So maybe if I do this, that looks better. So we get the collection, we get the document, and then we set the data to our new favorited rockets list. Okay. And so since we're updating our favorite rockets list, this will update it on the database, but it will also update it because we're listening to changes for those rockets. It will also update it over here. So we will immediately see that change and be in sync with our database. Now I'm saying that, but obviously this needs to work first. So let's do a hard restart just to be sure. And I'm going to open our Firebase here so you can see that change happen. Now, we might need to do one extra step before this works, but I'm going to bet that it does work. Ooh, we have a little thing here. We might have some form of error. We do have our favorite rockets here based on our user ID, which is perfect. You saw it appear. So that's good. The only thing we need to check now is what happened there. So we might have had an error. So let me try this little debugging step as well. Snapshot.error. Let's print that and make sure that I can see it. A list of dynamic is not a subtype of list of string. That's right. Because we're getting data from the internet, we don't always know its type for sure in runtime. There are multiple reasons for this, but in short, what we can do here is to make sure that our data is a list of string, is we can just say a list of string from the data that we get. This way we can be sure that our types are right. So let's refresh, and there we go. So now, if I open up this and flick this, there we go. Our favorited rockets is getting updated. And so we have our favoriting system. And we can go over here, add this Falcon 9, and we can go back and remove this one. And this is all live data. And so we don't need to do anything with managing our subscriptions and all stuff like that. We just add our little icon and it will do the rest for us, which is perfect. And we're authenticated. So you could hook this up to like a real database or, well, this is a real database, but like an online app where people can log in and add their favorite rockets, stuff like that. And that's not too difficult to do. Now, one nice little touch here at the end might be to show which rockets we favorited right from here. So let's do that. Let's go to our home screen and add a little thing here. So we do have a future builder here that will give us the list of rockets. What I can also do is if I then use a stream builder as well. Now, obviously you can structure this a little bit better than I'm doing right now, but this is live coding and it's meant to be a learning experience. So I'll just put this in here. Let's say context.backend dot favorited rockets. And then we can do the same as we did over here to make sure that we've loaded everything properly. So let's return early or else. There we go. So now we can say final favorited rockets is our snapshot.data. And there we go. Now let's take our return that we had before, which goes over here. That is the list view. That is our future builder. Perfect. Let's put it over here. And so now in here, in this list view, we have access to both our rockets, but also our favorited rockets. So now we can show that. So we have two options here. We can either do it inside the list tile or we can do it from up here. That's actually a better idea. I might do that. If we pass it a rocket, yeah, let's do that. Okay, let me go back here. I'm going to remove the stream builder to make it just a little bit cleaner so it's easier to understand. So let's remove the stream builder and let's go into the rocket list tile instead. And I'm going to add the stream builder there. Now, obviously, this puts a dependency on our backend in our rocket list tile, but I'm okay with that for now. So in this list tile, let's add a stream builder. Now, this also means that every single one of these list tiles is dependent on a stream builder, right? And which needs to load in and all that kind of stuff. But that's okay with me. So let's say that we get our favorited rockets. Now, let's see, has favorited. I'm going to make a Boolean here, and has favorited is snapshot.data. Let's say that the snapshot needs to have data, and snapshot.data, which is our list of favorite rockets, contains the rocket ID. There we go. So if we don't have it favorited, then we don't do anything. If we do have it favorited, what should we do? We could add it to the title here, for example. So that means that we can add this as a, I don't know, as a row. Let's make a row here. Now, I don't want this to be as big as possible because there's really no reason for it. So let's make it the row as small as possible. Now, just saving this and reloading shouldn't do anything, which it doesn't. Perfect. Now, let's say in this collection, so we have the name this name right over here, the Falcon Heavy, Falcon 9, Falcon 1, stuff like that. If has favorited, then we add two things to our list of children in this row. I'm going to use a list expansion for that, the spreader. First off, let's add a little bit of padding. So like 4 pixels, I think. And then let's add a icon as well. Now, actually, this entire list can be const, which is nice. If you use Pedantic, you'll see this a lot as well, where you can quite easily separate, where you can easily. Right. Sorry, I got a little lost in thought there. If you use Pedantic, you'll see it also recommending to use const wherever you can because of those optimizations and just in general, a nicer programming experience. So let's use end icons and let's use hearts. I don't need an accounting book for my icon here. And let's use the red accent again. Okay, that looks good. Now let's reload. There we go. It's a little bit big. I'm gonna change it up a little bit. I'm gonna add a size, maybe 16. I'm not sure. Let's have a look, see what it looks like. That's better. Okay, I'm liking this. Cool. So now if I heart this Falcon 1, it's updated in the database and I also get to see it here. That's nice. Okay, I like this little addition. So yeah, and I think with that, we have most of our app complete. I'm happy where we've ended up. I think we can add one little thing here to sign off, and that's to close the project and just have a look at what we've built. So yeah, I'm really glad. I hope you all enjoy what we've been able to build here today as well. I hope you've learned something and participated yourself. I hope I won't sneeze too loudly. There we go. But most of all, I hope that you've participated yourself. Please take a look at the code. All of this will be up on our GitHub at the link that Simon is frantically looking for right now. There you go. Yeah, please check it out. Episode 3 will be up in just a couple hours, and then you can view all of this yourself if you have added your own Firebase configuration and all that good stuff. So yeah, thank you for doing this journey with me. I hope you learned a lot, and be sure to check out the code and keep on fluttering.
Jay, that was a hell of a lot. That just honestly, that's amazing work. So
thank you.
So much going on at the moment, and yeah, for you to be able to just pull it off, that's just brilliant.
Thanks, appreciate it.
There is. I noticed when you were doing that. I mean, there was a couple of comments, and especially like I think there was one that was like separation of concerns.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the key point here is, I think, to mention to people is when you're doing this style of live coding, right? You just put the functions in line and just make it work, right? That's the point, right? Whereas a lot of the time when you build an app, for sure, that Flutter doesn't stop you, or Dart doesn't stop you from creating separate classes and separate things and separating your project up and having the separation of concern and like that sort of thing. So just to be clear that, you know.
Definitely. And like with most projects, how I start most projects these days is there won't be any UI for a month. It's just setting up like a proper architecture, making sure that we have everything down, and then we start doing ugly UI, and then at the end, the final stretch, it'll start becoming pretty, right?
You're supposed to make sure the app is functional first before it's pretty.
I try to do so, definitely. Is that a sin?
I think there's definitely things you can, I mean, there's definitely ways of tackling that, right? In terms of having, you can do mocks for data and then build your UI in front, and there's lots of different ways of doing that. And then another thing key point that I see working with there is that you're currently using snapshots, right? So it's always nice to have that kind of like leave Firebase and all your external dependencies in one area of your application, so that you're not sort of stringing your entire application with classes from Firebase and from these external libraries and other providers.
Yep.
And that way, if you want to change from Firebase to a different, thing, you've already used your own model, so you don't have to worry about that. You just change the back end of the application.
Exactly. Try to set it up in such a way where you have a sort of like an API interface that your app uses for two reasons. One is that you can then mock it and then just use mock data to get your UI started, so your front end team doesn't need to wait for your back end stuff to be done. But also so that you can easily swap it out with another implementation entirely if you want to move from Firebase to your own back end or the other way around. It doesn't matter. Your API is the same, so everything will work. That is ideal.
And when working with HTTP, what I've been doing here is I'll start up another instance of my IDE, and I'll use a Dart web server, and then I just set everything up in Dart on the web server, and I just bounce. Now, to do it with the Android emulator, somebody here might have run into a little bit of a problem before realizing that the Android emulator on your desktop cannot reach localhost. You have to ping it out off your router with the internal LAN IP of your computer. Wow. Before that's going to be able to reach it.
Well,
so, it works very well.
As I say, if you're using an emulator, then it should only it still uses your local internal adapter. It never goes across your network, right? Because it will know that the IP address is assigned to your local network adapter. So it's the IP stack inside of your operating system. Okay. But it's still it has to exit the emulator. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Anyway, so we've been running very long time. We actually overrun this week, so thank you everyone for the 85 people that are left in the chat. Thank you for sticking around, and I'm sure the stream is going to be. Yeah, I'm sure the stream though is going to be watched by lots and lots of people that didn't get to make it here or in a different time zone, for example. So I appreciate for everyone for sticking around. And feel free again. We'll be back here next Thursday. Subscribe. Was it like, comment, subscribe, and all that jazz? There you go.
Follow on Twitter.
Yeah. All that
Did we all just do this at the same time?
Yeah.
Same goes for this one. I see that all the time as well.
So yeah. Stick around, and you'll get if you subscribe, you'll get notified about next week's stream, and a way to set a reminder up for that. And we'll also be if you follow us at Fluttercom, COMM. On Twitter, you'll also get notifications about future events, as well as cool articles from the Flutter community. So see you then.
See you then, everybody.
Thanks for coming.
Bye. See you next Thursday.